It shouldn't surprise anyone that this series is long overdue. I've known for some time that delving into the Primarchs was essential, an unavoidable cornerstone in any serious discussion of the lore. But perhaps my hesitation shows a kind of sincerity. I didn't want to churn out something hastily, even though any talk about the Primarchs would, by default, generate easy engagement. Within the grim, vast galaxy of M41, these beings are not just mythic, they are the bedrock of its structure and meaning. And honestly, they're intimidating to discuss. Their stories, like so many of the great names and themes of the Warhammer universe, are scattered across decades of lore, buried in rulebooks, faded source materials, and the heavy tomes of Black Library novels. To speak about any one of them requires a deliberate choice. What should you include? What should you leave out? And what do you dare to summarize? There are 19 in all. Yes, I count Alfarius and Omegon separately, and each demands his own level of attention. Then comes the daunting task of rereading the Horus Heresy books you last opened over a decade ago, which is exactly what I found myself doing. Among them, Sanguinius has always stood apart, a figure of both brilliance and heartbreak. His story carries an almost sacred tragedy. For those of us who grew up seeing Mike McVeigh's iconic diorama depicting the final battle between Horus and the Emperor, the image of Sanguinius, broken and lifeless upon the deck of the Vengeful Spirit, still strikes deep. It was more than a model. It captured the emotional core of that mythic confrontation, the instant before humanity's fate was decided. Over the years, each Primarch has been reinterpreted through different creative lenses. Some, like Lorgar and Angron, have had their formative years detailed so vividly that you can trace every later belief and decision back to those defining moments. Others, like Sanguinius, are treated with more restraint. His beginnings are acknowledged but never deeply explored, perhaps because his essence lies not in his origin, but in how he lived and led. Still, the fragments we do have, from novels like Fear to Tread, the 21st book of the Heresy series, give us flashes of who he was. That novel remains the single most substantial source on the Blood Angels and their angelic Genefather, even though he is not its sole focus. We glimpse Sanguinius through his decisions, commands, and expectations, which together build a quiet but powerful portrait. Beyond that, he appears in the Forge World Black Books, the monumental works of lore shaped by Alan Bligh, and in scattered references throughout the Heresy saga. One of my favorites comes from No Fear, where Roboute Guilliman reflects that with Dorn, Russ, Manus, or Sanguinius beside him, he could win any war against any enemy. It's a fleeting moment, yet it says volumes about how even among demigods, Sanguinius inspired unmatched faith. And speaking of No Fear, which, yes, spoilers, centers around the Word-Bearer's infamous betrayal at Calth, it also includes one of the most haunting scenes in the entire series: the sudden, casual execution of an ultramarine mid-conversation, as he and a Word-Bearer calmly debate their purpose moments before death cuts in without warning. That scene, like so much of this universe, reminds me why the Primarchs matter. They embody both the ideals and the doom that define the galaxy of the 41st millennium: radiant, terrible, and unforgettable. The sheer brutality of that execution, the speed, the ideological impossibility of it, captures in a single heartbeat the dawning horror that loyalists are only beginning to comprehend. It's a moment so potent, so precise, that I've often joked I should frame that line and hang it on my wall. Because within those few words lies the full weight of betrayal, of trust shattered without warning. And yet that scene, much like Guilliman's passing remark about Sanguinius, proves how even fleeting mentions can illuminate an entire character's essence. It's through these fragments that we assemble a greater understanding, the subtle insights that shape how later novels portray these titanic figures. I mention this because context is everything. The lore of Warhammer 40k doesn't come to us as gospel. It's not a single voice proclaiming immutable truth. It's a chorus of biased narrators, fractured accounts, and secondhand testimonies filtered through unreliable eyes. Take The Great Angel, for instance, a novel wholly devoted to Sanguinius. It's told entirely from the viewpoint of a remembrancer, a historian tasked with recording truth in a time when truth is a luxury. That limited lens is both a blessing and a curse. We see Sanguinius not as an untouchable myth, but as he appeared to a mortal observer, glorious, terrifying, and heartbreakingly human. Yet even that remembrancer admits to doubt, questioning his own clarity, wondering how much of what he witnessed was truth and how much was awe. This perspective reminds us that even honesty can distort when filtered through reverence. Beyond such intimate portrayals lie the grand epics of the Siege of Terra, echoes of eternity and the end and the death, works that pull us closer to the Primarch's final hours. But as always, in the galaxy of M41, we are left piecing together shards, interpreting more than we are told, reading between the lines of conflicting scripture to find meaning where none is explicitly offered. And that, in many ways, is the point. The Primarchs were never meant to be entirely knowable. Their mystery is part of their power. The tale of their scattering, for example, remains one of the great enigmas. Before the Great Crusade had even begun, the Emperor's 20 sons, crafted with divine precision, were hurled across the galaxy through a warp-born cataclysm. For centuries, scholars debated the cause. Even now, though much has been revealed, the complete truth remains veiled. One name often rises in that discussion: Erda, a powerful perpetual and psyker, active long before the Unification Wars. Erda was unveiled in the Siege of Terra saga as none other than the mother of the Primarchs. Her story complicates everything we thought we knew. She opposed the Emperor's plan once she saw what purpose her children were meant to serve: living weapons, instruments of conquest. It's an irony difficult to ignore. How could someone so ancient, so perceptive, fail to anticipate what the Emperor intended? The notion borders on absurd, as if a scientist engineered a virus of near-total lethality, and only afterward wondered why the supervillain commissioning it might want such a thing. It's the same fatal naivety, brilliance shackled by denial. Erda's moral protest feels almost human in that way, an echo of countless tragedies where idealism blinds the mind to obvious cruelty. And so the Primarchs were scattered, their destinies cast adrift by choices made in arrogance and grief. Even now, that act stands as one of the most defining mysteries of the Warhammer mythos. A mother's regret, a father's control, and the birth of demigods doomed to war against each other across eternity. Perhaps I'm being overly cynical when I say this, but it's difficult not to question Erda's timing. The Emperor, as we all know, isn't exactly the picture of benevolence. So if she truly objected to his intentions for the Primarchs, it feels like she should have realized the moral dilemma before the project was 99% complete. Only when the consequences became impossible to ignore did she act, using her immense psychic power to scatter the Primarchs across the galaxy. Even then, the specifics of how she accomplished it remain obscure, though within the chaotic chronology of the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, such ambiguity feels almost fitting. Time itself, after all, is treacherous territory in the 41st millennium. I've often spoken about causal loops, the theoretical notion that someone from the future can travel back to the past and, through intervention, ensure the very timeline they departed remains inevitable. This so-called bootstrap paradox erases the idea of a true beginning, creating a self-contained circle of cause and effect. A striking example within the lore involves the word-bearer Argueltal. Acting under the influence of the demon Ingethel, he destroyed the Geller field, protecting the Primarch gestation pods, effectively enabling their scattering into the warp. Some even suggest that during this exposure, the Primarchs may have been tainted by the warp's touch, an unsettling but plausible theory that has never been definitively proven. The entire incident raises enduring questions about whether time in Warhammer 40k operates as a straight line, an endless loop, or something far stranger, a paradoxical coexistence of linearity and eternity, reality and the warp. Confusing, yes, but consistent with the universe's logic. This theme connects intriguingly to another novel I didn't mention earlier, Pharos. Beyond its broader lore implications, such as potentially being the event that attracted the Tyranids to the galaxy, Pharos also delves deeply into the complex dynamic between two of the most fascinating Primarchs, Sanguinius and Conrad Curza. Sanguinius, the angelic lord of the Blood Angels, bore the gift, or curse, of foresight. To Kurz, the Night Haunter, this ability only confirmed his own fatalistic worldview. That destiny was fixed, that corruption was inevitable, that hope was a lie. While Kurz's visions drove him into darkness, Sanguinius experienced his own glimpses of the future as a test of purpose rather than despair. In Pharos, Kurz lurks in the shadows of Ultramar, hidden within a world that should represent humanity's triumph. Yet even there, surrounded by Guilliman's gleaming cities and ordered prosperity, Kurz sees only hypocrisy. The downtrodden remain in the shadows, forgotten and broken, living proof that the Emperor's so-called enlightenment is a hollow performance, an empire built on denial. To him, all of this grandeur is a farce designed to glorify the Emperor while ignoring the inherent corruption of mankind and its unbreakable tie to the warp. We cannot elevate ourselves, Kurz argues. Nothing truly changes. His confrontation with Sanguinius becomes a profound philosophical clash between despair and faith, fatalism and duty. Kurz accuses the Emperor of deceit, claiming his crusade is merely a manipulation, and presses Sanguinius to admit as much. To Kurz, the evidence is undeniable. Even Guilliman, the most disciplined and pragmatic of them all, eventually concedes that the scattering of the Primarchs was no accident. The Emperor, they reason, must have foreseen it, and perhaps even allowed it to happen, because it served his larger purpose. The simplest explanation, as Kurz brutally states, is that the Emperor saw what was coming and simply decided it was acceptable, or even necessary, for the future he intended to forge. Kurz's argument hinges on one chilling observation: the impossibility of coincidence. Every Primarch, without exception, landed on a world that perfectly reflected or amplified his defining traits. How could that be chance? Would Guilliman have become the paragon of civilization if raised on the toxic death world of Barbarous? Could Angren have found peace on Macrega, or Mortarion have thrived on Prospero? The logic collapses under scrutiny. The scattering was deliberate, an orchestration masquerading as chaos. And in that realization lies one of the darkest, most revealing truths about the Emperor's design. Even in apparent disorder, his hand was always there, shaping destiny from the shadows. It's not that the Primarchs wouldn't have survived had they landed elsewhere. They might still have grown into reflections of the beings we know, but without the specific worlds that shaped them, their defining traits would not have been so magnified. Their virtues and flaws alike were intensified by the environments they were thrust into, sculpting them into extremes of purpose and emotion. Had they instead grown up in more balanced circumstances, they might have emerged as fuller, more stable individuals. And the Horus Heresy, or at least the scale of its devastation, could well have been diminished, perhaps even averted entirely. From that perspective, the scattering itself begins to look deliberate, a necessary catalyst for the Emperor's grand design. It gave him both motive and momentum, a reason to send out the Great Crusade, to reunite with his lost sons, to turn their rediscovery into a divine mission. The emotional effect, too, cannot be overlooked. Each Primarch's salvation from exile carried with it an immense gratitude and loyalty toward the one who found them. For their Space Marine legions, the quest to locate their Primarchs became a source of mythic purpose, a journey charged with devotion and awe. Even the tragedies served intent. Take Angren, for example, the quintessential embodiment of rage and rebellion. His reunion with the Emperor was no joyous occasion. Torn from his world before he could resolve his own war for freedom, Angren's bitterness toward his creator burned ever deeper. It's difficult to see that as accidental. In fact, it fits seamlessly into a pattern. Each Primarch's life unfolding in ways that would ultimately serve the Emperor's inscrutable aims. To Konrad Kurz, this confirmed everything he already believed. In his coldly rational view, the Emperor was not a savior, but a cruel manipulator, a being who had engineered every circumstance and emotion from the very beginning. To Kurz, destiny itself was a fixed pattern, the galaxy a grand puzzle already solved. His worldview aligns with the eternalist notion of time I've often mentioned, that events in the 41st millennium are not a progression but a structure, unchangeable, inevitable, self-contained. Sanguinius, on the other hand, resisted this fatalism. He wanted to believe in freedom, in choice, in the possibility that foresight did not mean inevitability. Yet both he and Kurz shared prophetic visions, fragments of futures drenched in despair, not the radiant age the Emperor promised. Each revelation chipped away at Sanguinius's faith, even as he refused to yield to it. Their dialogue in Pharos captures the essence of their divide. At one point, Sanguinius accuses Kurz, saying, "The faults of your sons are the faults of the father," meaning that the Night Lord's cruelty reflects their Primarch's darkness. Kurz's reply is as sharp as a blade. "Oh, how very apt." On the surface, it's a simple retort, but beneath it lies layered irony. Kurz is mocking Sanguinius for unwittingly confirming his argument, that the same principle applies to the Emperor himself. The flaws of the Primarchs are the flaws of their maker. The bloodshed, the betrayal, the heresy itself, each can be traced back to the Emperor's design and arrogance. Personally, it's difficult to entirely dismiss Kurz's logic. Twisted though his reasoning may be, there's an uncomfortable truth buried within it. Still, the contrast between them, the doomed idealist and the cynical prophet, speaks to the heart of the Imperium's tragedy. There is always a choice, Sanguinius insists, a last echo of hope in a universe drowning in inevitability. There is never a choice, Kurz answers, sealing the conversation like a verdict. Their exchange lingers long after the words fade, a microcosm of the Emperor's own paradox. Freedom sculpted by control, chaos born of intention. And so, before we even fully reach Sanguinius' story, this dialogue lays the groundwork for one chilling realization. The scattering of the Primarchs may never have been an accident at all, but a calculated step in the Emperor's hidden design to ensure that civil war, in one form or another, would come to pass, fulfilling either his plan or an immutable destiny written into the fabric of time itself. And now that all of this groundwork has been laid, I won't need to revisit it later. Whatever the cause, the scattering occurred, and Sanguinius, angelic child of the Emperor, was cast down upon the moon of Baal Secundus. It was no paradise. The surface was barren and poisoned, its skies choked with radiation storms, its soil little more than a crust of ash and broken glass. Yet compared with the worlds some of his brothers endured, Baal Secundus was almost merciful. Long before his arrival, Baal and its twin moons had been obliterated in some forgotten cataclysm, a fusion of atomic fire and viral plague that erased nearly all traces of the civilization that once thrived there. Such devastation was tragically common during the Age of Strife, when countless human colonies collapsed under their own weight. Cut off from the wider Imperium, their resources exhausted and their technologies decayed, they turned upon themselves. On countless worlds, the remnants of humanity devolved into warlords, scavengers, or techno-barbarians battling for scraps of what remained after the wars against the Men of Iron. Baal Secundus was one such place, a dead moon populated by what could barely be called humans, their DNA corroded by generations of radiation exposure. They survived only by huddling in cave systems, living off the desolate land, their bodies warped and twisted by centuries of mutation. Civilization had long since vanished. Memory itself had decayed into myth. The only way these survivors preserved their past was through stories passed from mouth to mouth, tales distorted by time and desperation. Ironically, that oral tradition would one day echo in the culture of the Blood Angels themselves, singers and storytellers carrying their history in voice and song. In a way, it was fitting that the winged Primarch should fall among a people marked by mutation. For anywhere else, a child born with such deformities might have been slain on sight. On Baal Secundus, however, his difference was not cause for execution but for awe. Even so, there were whispers among the tribes. How could a child so perfect, so unblemished by disease, have survived in such a toxic wasteland? Some saw him as an omen, others as a threat, too pure to belong. A few even demanded his death, arguing that such beauty could only be unnatural. But fate, or perhaps design, intervened. The child lived. The Barlight tribes wove his story into legend, retelling it for generations as if it were a divine visitation. Like all Primarchs, Sanguinius grew with impossible speed. Within weeks, he could walk, speak, and even wander beyond his tribe's protection. One story tells of him being discovered inside the lair of a barlight fire scorpion, a creature whose venom could kill a dozen men in moments. The tribesmen found the beast slain and the child unharmed, though the poison had entered his veins. Any mortal would have died in agony. Sanguinius endured it as though it were nothing. From that moment, none doubted his nature. As the years passed, his wings grew vast and white as snow, luminous even beneath Baal's dim skies. His beauty was so profound that many found it painful to gaze upon him for long, as if his very presence reminded them of everything lost in the long decay of humanity. Unlike the tribes who worshipped him, the harsh air never weakened him, and no radiation scarred his flesh. To them, he was proof that the divine still walked among men. Yet, as with all the Emperor's sons, his destiny would not remain one of peace. There came a day when the tribe of the angelic child found itself besieged by a horde of cannibalistic mutants, hundreds, strong, twisted mockeries of humanity who descended upon them under blood-red skies. It was then that Sanguinius revealed the purpose for which he and all his kind were made. The awe the tribes once felt turned to reverence born of terror as the child of light took up arms and faced the nightmare tide. In that moment, the being they had called miraculous became something else entirely. The first glimpse of the warrior god who would one day lead the blood angels into legend. Death was an accepted constant on Baal Secundus, and when the tribes found themselves surrounded by a horde of cannibalistic mutants, none expected to survive. Yet Sanguinius refused to surrender. In that desperate moment, the angel revealed his true nature, not merely as a protector, but as a weapon of divine wrath. Witnesses would later recall that his radiance changed. The golden aura of mercy turned into a terrible storm of shadow and crimson light. His wings darkened, his eyes blazed like suns, and what emerged was not the gentle savior the tribes had worshipped, but an avenging spirit, the angel of death incarnate. He tore through the enemy with impossible fury, moving faster than the eye could follow, every sweep of his arm a blur of violence. When the dust settled, the plain was silent except for the hiss of burning flesh. Sanguinius stood amid the carnage, his alabaster wings spattered red, his expression unreadable, his beauty now something fearful. From that day, he united the surviving tribes, those few whose minds had not been consumed by mutation, into a single force. Together, under his command, they waged war against the degenerate horrors that still roamed Baal Secundus, purging the wastes of the worst abominations. Vastly outnumbered but guided by Sanguinius's strength and vision, they prevailed. The legend of the winged god spread across the moon until his followers worshipped him not just as a leader, but as salvation itself. By the time the Emperor's ships finally descended through the irradiated clouds, the tribes of Baal already believed they lived under divine protection. So when they saw the Emperor step forth to meet their angelic lord, they believed they were witnessing the meeting of two gods. For Sanguinius, the arrival of the golden figure from the stars was both awe-inspiring and strangely familiar. He had never seen a starship before, but the moment it broke the sky, he knew instinctively who had come. His prophetic sight stirred within him, the certainty that his father had arrived. When the two finally stood face to face, the encounter revealed much about both beings. The Emperor, so often aloof and inscrutable, showed a flicker of uncertainty, as though unsure how much of himself to reveal to this radiant son who could see so deeply. Sanguinius perceived that the being before him was human, yet not truly a man. Behind the Emperor's eyes, he glimpsed the light of countless souls, flickering like a constellation of living fire. The Emperor, in turn, extended his psychic presence effortlessly, speaking the language of Baal as though born to it. But Sanguinius, ever perceptive, recognized the flaw hidden within perfection. The Emperor's faultless composure, his immaculate control, was not comforting, it was alien. In that flaw, Sanguinius saw the contradiction that would define their future together, the glory and the horror, the triumphs and the massacres, the golden vision that would demand mountains of corpses to achieve. His foresight painted a grim duality. the Emperor as both creator and destroyer, savior and executioner. When Sanguinius asked what he truly was, the Emperor's answer was chilling in its precision. "You are a Primarch, my 9th general, a component of the great work. You were stolen by my enemies, and perhaps changed by them." That final admission carried a weight that neither could dismiss. It implied that even the Emperor could not be certain his perfect creation remained untainted. Later, when Sanguinius told him, "I see you as the death of faith," the Emperor replied, "Yes, and also no." It was a cryptic acknowledgement, one that suggested he already glimpsed the path leading toward his own godhood, or perhaps he merely recognized the danger of faith itself. Most likely, his response reflected the delicate balance he sought. Not to destroy belief entirely, but to control it, to shape it into something that served his purpose. Unlike many of his brothers, Sanguinius could already perceive the contradictions in that vision, the beauty and hypocrisy intertwined at its core. He saw with terrible clarity what his father truly was, and what he would one day become. Worlds that clung stubbornly to faith were burned to ash in the name of the imperial truth, while others, like the Mechanicum, were spared. Their superstitions tolerated because their utility outweighed ideology. That compromise, that hypocrisy at the heart of the Emperor's grand vision, would leave a mark on Sanguinius that he would never forget. So when his father spoke of glory, of elevation, and of the 9th Legion that awaited his command, Sanguinius hesitated only long enough to imagine what might happen if he refused. The Emperor, of course, already knew he would not. All the angel asked in return was mercy for his tribe, that the Emperor's armies leave them untouched. The request was granted, and Sanguinius accepted his destiny. Thus, the Revenant 9th became the Blood Angels. Once a broken legion, bled dry by impossible campaigns, they had been cast again and again into wars of extermination where survival itself was a miracle. Their numbers dwindled, their spirit curdled into savagery. These warriors became known for their feral zeal, fighting with brutal elegance at close range, turning entire battlefields into butcheries. Civilians and soldiers alike were consumed in their fury. They were the Emperor's blade when terror was required, the scourge unleashed upon those who would not kneel. Even loyal Imperial commanders had begun to censure them for their excesses, though their usefulness was undeniable. Under Sanguinius, all of that changed. The arrival of the Angel reshaped the 9th Legion in both form and soul. He did not extinguish their ferocity, he refined it, forged it into something disciplined and purposeful. The Butchers became artists of war. What had once been horror was transmuted into beauty, gold-plated armor, crimson banners, and the image of angelic warriors descending like divine judgment. Yet beneath the gleaming surface, the old hunger still burned. Sanguinius taught them to mask it, to hide the monster within ceremony and grace. Their violence became ritual, their destruction choreographed into something almost transcendent. On the battlefield, Sanguinius's very presence inspired both terror and awe. His radiant wings gleamed amid the smoke and ruin, and his legion mirrored that vision, striking as living embodiments of divine retribution. Thus was born the legend of the Blood Angels, the Angels of Death, whose wrath came not from cruelty, but from purpose. Sanguinius himself embodied contradiction, healer and destroyer, savior and executioner. For all his compassion, he was still one of the Emperor's creations, and all such creations existed for war. Under his guidance, the 9th Legion became the embodiment of controlled devastation. What had once been unrestrained slaughter was now efficiency elevated to art. Planets fell not only through bloodshed, but through spectacle. Entire civilizations surrendered at the mere sight of them, armored figures descending from the heavens, white wings gleaming under alien suns, their leader shining like a star at the heart of a storm. The Blood Angels learned that conquest did not always require annihilation. Sometimes awe achieved what weapons could not. Those who resisted were crushed utterly, but those who submitted found themselves spellbound by the grandeur of the Imperium's angels. In this, Sanguinius proved to be everything the Emperor desired from his sons: loyal, brilliant, and utterly effective. Where Perturabo brooded in bitterness and Angron raged against his chains, Sanguinius shone. He unified, inspired, and conquered with grace. To many across the stars, he seemed the perfect realization of the Primarch ideal, the living bridge between humanity's mortal frailty and the Emperor's impossible vision. Among the Emperor's sons, Sanguinius stood near the pinnacle. Alongside Horus and Guilliman, he was considered for the role of War Master, a testament to his brilliance both in battle and in diplomacy. Countless accounts from the Great Crusade and the Heresy attest to this, but what stands out most vividly is his bond with Horus. Fear to Tread captures their closeness with rare intimacy. Horus's open admiration for the angel, his reliance on Sanguinius's counsel, and their mutual trust so profound that they swore to keep certain truths hidden even from their father. Those secrets, particularly regarding the growing instability within the Ninth Legion, bound them together long before the shadow of treachery fell. Their connection ran deeper than mere brotherhood. Sanguinius saw the light within Horus long after it had begun to fade, and when the time came, he was the one who fought hardest to save him. That is why his death at Horus's hand, on the deck of the Vengeful Spirit, carries such unbearable weight. It was not only a betrayal of loyalty, but the shattering of faith itself. None understood Horus better, and none suffered more from his fall, save perhaps the Emperor himself. Yet even before that final tragedy, Sanguinius had been the heart that tried to hold his brothers together. He was mediator, confidant, and conscience, an anchor in an age of pride and ruin. His empathy, evident from the moment he met the Emperor, may not have been mere temperament. It could well have been shaped by his foresight, the visions that haunted him since his earliest days. Perhaps every act of compassion was also an act of resistance, a desperate attempt to alter the grim futures he glimpsed. When he sought to heal divisions, it was not naivete. It was defiance against inevitability. The relationship between a Primarch and his legion was always symbiotic, each reflecting and amplifying the other. In the case of the Ninth, that bond was both a gift and a curse. Even after Sanguinius's arrival, the Blood Angels bore the shadow of a terrible flaw. Whether genetic or psychic, it manifested as the Red Thirst, a gnawing hunger for blood, a violent mania that overtook them in battle. Sanguinius hid this truth, believing he could master it, that once the Great Crusade ended, he might cure it. Until then, the flaw was disguised behind ceremony and splendor, buried beneath the pageantry of the angelic image they projected to the Imperium. In the Great Angel, this dissonance is captured perfectly through the eyes of a remembrancer. The propagandists painted the Blood Angels as divine warriors, radiant exemplars of humanity's potential. But to those who fought beside them, the truth was horrifying. The so-called angels were killers of unmatched ferocity, their artistry of war concealing a barely restrained bloodlust. That contrast between image and reality was staggering, and yet it persisted because the Imperium needed its icons. Even as the heresy erupted and their hidden curse deepened, Sanguinius himself remained unblemished in reputation. His peers respected him, the Emperor trusted him absolutely, and wherever he appeared, mortal soldiers fell to their knees in reverence. They called him Angel, Saint, Savior, words forbidden in an Imperium that claimed to have cast aside faith. Ironically, Sanguinius embodied faith more purely than any preacher could. He carried himself as a demigod, yet spoke always of humanity, never divinity. Where Lorgar sought worship and was condemned for it, Sanguinius inspired devotion simply by existing, all while upholding the imperial truth. He walked a razor's edge, radiating spiritual awe, but professing reason and loyalty. In that way, he mirrored his father, a being too magnificent to be human, yet insisting he was nothing more. Humanity couldn't help but believe otherwise. And still, unlike the Emperor, Sanguinius felt the cost of that contradiction. His foresight, once a blessing, corrupted his idealism, showing him again and again the Empire's rot beneath its gilded surface. Like Kurzi, he glimpsed the truth. The Imperium's glory was built on suffering, its enlightenment on lies. Yet unlike Kurz, he chose to hope anyway. It was that choice, to see the darkness and still fight for the light, that defined him, and ultimately doomed him. What many interpreted as Sanguinius's tireless discipline and sense of urgency was, in truth, born from something deeper, a quiet awareness of what the future already held. His life was driven not by ambition but by inevitability. Where Horus had been raised to wield and command power, and Guilliman had learned to shape empires with precision and reason, Sanguinius's path was one of acceptance. He did not build his destiny, he walked into it. His was a life of purpose intertwined with tragedy, defined as much by what he foresaw as by what he could never change. Those around him believed they were forging history. Sanguinius knew he was fulfilling it. Every victory, every act of compassion, every sacrifice carried the silent weight of prophecy. Like Conrad Kurze, he saw the end long before it came. And unlike his darker brother, he faced it willingly. For those new to the vast mythos of the Great Crusade and the Horus heresy, it's hard to grasp just how central foresight and psychic power are to this universe. The concept of time in Warhammer 40k bends and fractures. Linear causality is more of a suggestion than a rule. Thankfully, it rarely descends fully into paradoxes, what some call time shenanigans, though the threat always lingers. The ability to see into the future, whether in brief flashes or sweeping visions, is woven into the very fabric of the setting. The Elder, once the most advanced of the galactic races, are masters of this art. Their entire civilization is structured around prophecy and the avoidance of doom, their greatest seers shaping millennia through glimpses of what might be. Humanity's psychers, by contrast, fumble in the dark. The Emperor himself stands apart, his designs for the Imperium rooted partly in what he perceives across the Immaterium's timeless expanse. To him, foresight was both weapon and curse, a way to steer humanity clear of extinction while never fully escaping the paradox that to see the future is, perhaps, to create it. Yet this gift is treacherous. It does not grant certainty, only fragments, moments without context, symbols without meaning until too late. Some futures are malleable, shifting under the weight of choice. Others are immutable, locked into place. And no one, not even the Emperor, fully understands the boundaries between them. Among the Eldar, this ability manifests naturally. Even their ordinary warriors, through innate psychic sensitivity, experience brief flashes of what is to come, an unconscious foresight that gives them their uncanny reflexes in combat. To fight an Eldar is to fight someone who moves half a second before you act. Their greatest seers, the Farseers, peer across centuries, straining to decipher which threads of fate can be altered and which must be endured. Humanity's psychic elite, the Emperor and his most gifted sons, attempt the same, though on a far more fragile foundation. And within that spectrum, Sanguinius stood distinct. His visions were not like Magnus's, whose psychic might rivaled God's, nor like Kurze's, whose foresight drove him into madness. Sanguinius's glimpses were subtler, impressions rather than certainties, fleeting images that flickered at the edge of comprehension. But when they came true, they came with absolute precision. He did not see everything, only the moments that mattered most, and among those, one stood fixed: his own death. Those around him mistook this burden for grace, interpreting his calm and his speed in battle as signs of divinity. He seemed always a fraction ahead of time, his movements guided by invisible knowledge, his choices preordained. To many, he appeared a miracle made flesh, a being touched by destiny. Yet beneath the light, he shared the same torment as Kurze, the awareness that free will might be nothing more than illusion, and that the greatest curse of all was not blindness, but sight. In The Great Angel, the Remembrancer Cotenia presses Sanguinius to explain the true nature of his gift. Ever the pragmatist, the angel gives a response that turns the romantic notion of prophecy on its head. To see the future, he says, is not empowerment, it is entrapment. Foresight, far from being a shield, can become a burden so heavy it destroys those who carry it. He admits that while glimpses of what is to come can sometimes be clear, the way an enemy moves, the arc of an axe, they are just as often abstract and intangible. The shape of a crusade, the fate of a soul. Such visions offer fragments of truth, but never the whole. Even if a vision is true, Sanguinius warns, you can misstep trying to fulfill it. You may see death and try to avoid it, only to walk directly into its jaws. You may glimpse glory and sacrifice your duty in the chase, losing yourself in the process. Foresight is useful, but it is no blessing. His words reveal a truth not only about himself, but about his father. What Sanguinius describes mirrors the Emperor's dilemma, the unbearable paradox of partial knowledge. Those who glimpse fragments of destiny mistake them for total understanding, but what they really hold are only shards of a vast and broken mirror. To see pieces of the puzzle without the whole picture is to live in perpetual uncertainty. A man dreams of his death and tries to avert it, only to bring it about. Another alters one disaster, only to unleash a greater one. The more one sees, the less one trusts what is seen. In this sense, Sanguinius helps us understand the Emperor's burden and his failures. For all his unmatched power, the Emperor's sight was still fragmented, his vast intellect cluttered by incomplete truths. He glimpsed countless futures, some triumphant, others apocalyptic, and believed he could thread the path between them. But secrecy, pride, and reliance on flawed creations, his Primarchs and their legions, twisted those designs. Each choice narrowed the options before him, until all the infinite futures he once saw converged toward a single, catastrophic outcome. At times, even he confessed uncertainty. When a custodian once asked what humanity should do next, the Emperor simply replied, "I do not know." It was an admission that shocked those who heard it, a god admitting doubt. But as Conrad Kurz once observed, such doubt was inevitable. When you see too far ahead, every decision becomes suspect. Which thread leads to salvation, and which to ruin? For a Primarch, that uncertainty was torment. For the Emperor, it was almost cosmic horror. He had witnessed both the triumph and extinction of mankind. For centuries, he believed he could steer the course toward victory. But the weight of secrecy and his own contradictions made his vision collapse inward. In his effort to control destiny, he strangled it. By the time of the heresy, he could no longer discern whether his actions were preserving humanity or damning it. Many believe this blindness nearly consumed him, drawing him perilously close to becoming the very thing he fought against. A god of order, calcified into tyranny and worship, sustained by faith and death. Only at the very end, in those final hours aboard the Vengeful Spirit, was he forced to confront another possibility. That fate could still be changed, that not all paths were fixed. Perhaps that realization, born too late, was what saved him from becoming the Dark King the warp demanded. Through Sanguinius's reflections, we come to see how foresight, this supposed divine gift, is a poison that corrodes certainty. To see the future is to live in doubt, forever questioning whether each act brings salvation or doom. The Eldar, masters of this art, understand this better than any race. Their seers step carefully through fate's threads, for even a single misjudged alteration can ripple across eternity. That caution separates them from humanity's reckless arrogance. A single vision can reshape empires and ruin them. The heresy itself began with such a vision. In False Gods, Horus is shown the future. The Emperor enthroned as a god, the Primarchs scattered, the Imperium crumbling. He sees himself absent, erased from history, and is told this is destiny. In that moment, the weaponization of prophecy is laid bare. To know the future is to fear it, and in that fear, to bring it to pass. It is the cruelest paradox of all, that those who see beyond the present are doomed to create the very fate they most wish to avoid. Horus, when first confronted with the prophetic vision of the Emperor enthroned as a god and himself absent from that future, failed to grasp its meaning. He didn't truly believe it, at least not at first. But the seed of fear was planted. The possibility of such a destiny took root in his mind, festering into obsession. And so, as Sanguinius would later warn, the effort to avoid a vision can become the very act that ensures it comes to pass. In trying to defy prophecy, Horus fulfilled it. Sanguinius, by contrast, understood the paradox. His visions were not limited to his own death at Horus's hands. They extended outward into the galaxy's coming ruin. The fall of his brothers, the burning of Terra, and the encroaching darkness that would swallow all. Yet he never mistook what he saw for inevitability. His life became a test of will to acknowledge destiny without surrendering to it. Even as his legion wrestled with corruption, he inspired them to endure, to hold their nobility amid the rot of the Imperium's wars. When the heresy reached its end, he marched to Terra knowing he would not return. He accepted the truth of his death, but not with despair, with purpose. Sacrifice was his creed, not his punishment. It defined him as much as his wings, and it was what separated him from those who shared his curse of foresight. Conrad Curze saw only doom and succumbed to it, convinced that tyranny and cruelty were the galaxy's natural state. Magnus sought to master the future through sorcery, only to become enslaved by it. Sanguinius alone accepted that foreknowledge did not grant control, it only demanded courage. During the Siege of Terra, as he stood before the Eternity Gate amid the tide of demons and traitors, he already knew this was not his last trial. His visions had shown him something darker still, the final confrontation aboard the Vengeful Spirit. Yet this awareness freed him. To live knowing your death is fixed allows for a strange clarity. Every battle before that moment was fought with the calm of one who had already let go. Like the samurai of ancient Terra, Sanguinius embodied the philosophy of accepting death in order to live without fear. In that detachment, he found power. Every strike, every command, every act of defiance became a meditation on inevitability. For a being cursed with foresight, there is no such thing as the present, only a constant negotiation between what is and what must be. And so one must ask, was even this acceptance engineered? Did the Emperor foresee that one of his sons would need to bear the burden of sacrifice, that Sanguinius alone would have the strength to die willingly? It seems almost certain. Few others could have endured such a fate. Angren would have raged against it, Perturabo would have resented it, and Horus, well, Horus tried to escape it and doomed himself instead. Sanguinius did not rage or flee. He simply walked the path laid before him. That acceptance may explain why the Emperor, despite ordering him to stay behind, allowed him to board the Vengeful Spirit. Both father and son knew what awaited, and both accepted the price. For the Great Crusade demanded obedience above all, compliance through any means necessary. The Blood Angels, for all their elegance and gilded nobility, were instruments of that will. Imperial records celebrate their strategic brilliance, their diplomacy, their pageantry. But the remembrancers who followed them saw the truth beneath the splendor. Whole systems brought to heel through terrifying precision, xeno-civilizations annihilated to the last. The Angels of Light were harbingers of absolute destruction. It was the paradox of the Great Crusade itself, beauty and horror, civilization built on fire. In the end, the most radiant of the Emperor's sons was also among the most human, for he understood what his father never could, that knowing the future changes nothing if one cannot face it with grace. The Blood Angels fought with a savagery that defied comprehension. Their ferocity was not merely strength multiplied, it was something that broke the limits of what human minds could tolerate. To their mortal allies, witnessing them in combat was both awe-inspiring and deeply wrong. Even among the Emperor's other transhuman warriors, the Ninth Legion stood apart. Their violence was too quick, too fluid, too absolute. They did not fight like men, nor even like beasts, but like instruments of an unrestrained purpose, moving with a precision that felt unnatural. Their strikes were clean, their momentum unstoppable, their slaughter too efficient to seem real. It unsettled those who saw it because something in the human brain rebelled, whispering, "This should not exist." These were not acts of heroism, but of deliberate unmaking. And that, of course, was exactly what the Emperor had intended when he designed them. From the age of unification, the legions had been shaped as his hammer, the tool with which he would rebuild the galaxy. The remembrancer assigned to the Blood Angels in the Great Angel captured this contradiction perfectly. He wrote that Sanguinius was magnificent in war, majestic, radiant, a vision of divine wrath, and yet profoundly wrong. To watch him fight was to experience the same unease one feels when confronted by perfect artificiality. The human mind seeks patterns, balance, the subtle rhythm of natural motion, and when those rules are violated, instinct recoils. Sanguinius moved through battle as if physical laws bent to accommodate him. His grace was beyond human comprehension, and therefore terrifying. Observers spoke of it in terms we might now use for digital illusions, so flawless that the brain itself rejected it. Just as the eye can detect false motion in a film or the faint artificiality of a synthetic image, so too could it sense that Sanguinius was something outside the world's natural order. His every movement existed slightly beyond what reality should permit. It is a haunting image, the most beautiful of the Emperor's sons, appearing godlike one moment and impossibly alien the next. The paradox of Sanguinius, and indeed of all the Primarchs, was that they were made to embody humanity's perfection, yet in doing so became estranged from it. They were weapons forged to protect mankind, but in their very perfection, they ceased to belong among those they defended. When Sanguinius unleashed his full fury, the spectacle was monstrous, not divine. His radiance turned predatory, his compassion transfigured into annihilation. The Blood Angels mirrored this duality, warriors of immaculate grace who, when provoked, descended into nightmare. The sight of them drenched in blood, their golden armor reflecting fire and gore, stripped away the myth of angelic purity. It revealed the truth. They were beautiful in the way a collapsing star is beautiful, radiant and deadly, a light that consumes everything around it. Guilliman too bore a version of this dissonance, but with Sanguinius, it was sharper because of how closely he resembled humanity's ideal. To see such purity descend into slaughter was to feel the fragility of all ideals. What had been built to inspire hope instead provoked fear. That raw honesty, rarely present in Imperial records, comes only from human witnesses, not from the polished propaganda of the Imperium. The official histories would tell you of heroes and triumphs, of angels bringing enlightenment to the stars. But the remembrancers, poets, and artists who saw these beings understood a harsher truth. They saw apathy, contempt, and horror beneath the pageantry. They saw the price of perfection. During the heresy, those rare human perspectives cut through the myth like shards of glass. When a mortal stood before a Primarch, one of the Emperor's living demigods, the illusion of grandeur collapsed. The human realized that such a being could extinguish them in an instant, and that knowledge stripped away awe, leaving only a bleak kind of understanding. In that confrontation between mortality and divinity, the human ego shattered. They stopped aspiring to be like these angels, and began to see them for what they truly were, creations of terrible genius, magnificent and monstrous in equal measure, reflections of everything humanity wished to become and everything it should never be. The Imperium had always sold the image of its demigods as golden paragons, being so radiant and immense that mortals should bow in awe before them, and indeed, most did. But there were always those rare individuals who looked past the myth, who saw the hollowness behind the ceremony and whispered, "No, I will not worship this." That tension, the clash between divinity and disillusion, reached its most grotesque form when Sanguinius and the 9th Legion were sent to Signus Prime. Acting under orders from Horus, the newly anointed War Master, Sanguinius believed he was undertaking a standard compliance campaign against a Xenos threat. He had no reason to doubt the command. In truth, the mission was a trap, carefully designed to isolate, corrupt, or destroy one of the few legions Horus knew would never betray the Emperor. During the heresy, deception became a weapon as potent as any bolter or blade. Loyal legions that could not be turned were instead diverted, delayed, or cut off entirely. Around the same time, the Word-Bearers unleashed their ambush at Calth, turning on the unsuspecting Ultramarines and slaughtering them by the tens of thousands. That massacre served a darker purpose: the creation of the Ruin Storm, a warp storm so vast it split the galaxy in two. Unlike the later Cicatrix Maledictum of M41, this was not a clean rupture in space-time, but a swelling tide of unreality that bled into the material universe. The warp saturated reality like poison seeping into a wound. Stars twisted into mocking shapes, Skies became living nightmares, and entire sectors vanished behind curtains of demonic fog. For the Imperium, it was the beginning of the Age of Darkness, a time when communication and travel disintegrated and the war became 1,000 isolated infernos. The Ultramarines, too numerous and disciplined to be destroyed outright, were simply cut off, their fleets scattered. Horus had no illusions about winning Guilliman's loyalty. He only needed to ensure that the 13th Legion never reached Terra. The Blood Angels entered the Signus system unaware of any of this. Expecting a routine compliance mission, they found only silence and ruin. From the moment their fleet translated into the system, reality itself began to falter. One of the planets had fractured into shapes resembling colossal runes, as if the surface itself had been rewritten by madness. Sensors malfunctioned, and time itself began to warp. Ship chronometers cycled endlessly through repeating sequences of sixes. 6, 66, 66, mocking order with impossible numbers. On the worlds below, the search for survivors became a descent into nightmare. What few traces of humanity remained were twisted beyond recognition. A hive city had turned into something alive, its streets pulsing like veins, its towers groaning like flesh. Reanimated wreckage attacked from the shadows, corpses moving under unseen direction. One world was so utterly corrupted that Sanguinius ordered exterminatus, the complete eradication of its surface. Still, he pressed deeper into the system, leading new expeditions to the inner planets, searching for reason amid chaos. But each step forward only revealed further decay, absence, desolation, and the unrelenting presence of the warp. Then came the voices. The fleet's mortal crew began to hear whispers in their minds, soft at first, then constant. They heard promises, laughter, and commands. The strongest among them went quietly insane, their eyes glazed with terror. Others reacted with primal violence, tearing at their own flesh, gouging out their eyes, or turning their weapons on comrades before ending themselves. Whole decks became slaughterhouses without a single shot fired by an enemy. The air filled with screams and prayers to gods they didn't understand. Even the Astartes, who had been engineered to resist fear and madness, found themselves vulnerable. During this early era of the Crusade, their knowledge of the warp was rudimentary at best. They knew of its existence, but not its nature. Their rational Imperial Faith, the Imperial Truth, offered no defense against what it denied. And as Malcador the Sigillite would later remark, that ignorance was the Imperium's greatest weakness. Perhaps, he said, the Emperor should have told them what they were really fighting. For in that silence, between truth and deception, the Blood Angels entered hell itself, unaware that the nightmare ahead was not a battle to win, but a trial designed to break them, or damn them forever. In the 41st millennium, the Adeptus Astartes at least possess some understanding of what lurks within the warp, and that grim awareness gives them a measure of resistance. But during the Great Crusade, such knowledge was scarce. Back then, as Malcador wryly noted, perhaps the Emperor should have told them what they were really fighting. For the warriors of the 9th Legion deployed to Signus, there was no immunity to what awaited. They were not broken as mortals were, but they still found themselves turning inward, forced to suppress their own crews before panic could become contagion. Some men were restrained, others executed outright to stop the madness from spreading through the fleet. The cost in morale was devastating. The Blood Angels were soon fighting for control of their own ships before they had even sighted an enemy, unsure what orders still meant, their purpose swallowed by chaos. It was during this chaos that the nightmare revealed itself. A presence slipped into Sanguinius's private sanctum, manifesting as the greater demon Cus the Perverse, a keeper of secrets in the service of Slaanesh. Its form was an unbearable paradox of beauty and revulsion, an alien majesty wrapped around filth. The creature taunted the Primarch, mocking his purity, daring him to descend to Cygnus Prime. Where another might have hesitated, Sanguinius did not. He accepted the challenge, his decision born of courage and perhaps defiance, qualities that would lead him into hell itself. The course was set. True to his nature, he was all or nothing. Unknown to him, Horus and the Dark Apostle Erebus had already conspired with their demonic allies to ensure the Ninth Legion's doom. They understood Sanguinius could never be seduced by false promises, but they hoped to break him through despair or death, corrupting his legion in the process. Yet, as ever within the great game of chaos, even the god's servants could not agree. While Erebus and Cuse sought to turn the angel toward the worship of Slaanesh, Horus and the bloodthirster Kabanda wanted no such thing. They viewed Sanguinius as too steadfast to sway and aimed only to destroy him, confident the Blood Angels would collapse into madness and fall to Khorne's influence afterward. The trap was perfectly set. Before the Ninth could even make planetfall, the fleet was assaulted by corpse ships, hulks crewed by the dead and puppeted by demonic will. The void filled with drifting abominations that rammed and tore at Imperial vessels. Losses were catastrophic. Amid the chaos, Admiral Athen of the Imperial Navy snapped, ordering his Gloriana-class flagship to ram Signus Prime itself. Only Sanguinius's psychic command saved them. He seized control of the ship and forced it into a controlled descent. The crash was devastating, but they survived. The Blood Angels now stood upon the cursed surface, surrounded by nightmare. Before them stretched the Cathedral of the Flawless Host, a temple devoted to Slaanesh's perversion of beauty. The structure itself mocked reality, a sprawling palace of twisting marble and pulsating glass, its geometry impossible, its corridors alive with whispering ecstasy. Every step violated the senses, bending sound and light into delirium. It was an abomination that could only exist where the warp and real space bled together. It had to be destroyed. At Sanguinius's command, First Captain Raldoron and Apothecary Meros led the vanguard, while the Primarch himself cut through the demonic hordes, carving a path toward the temple's heart. The city of Signus became a crucible of madness. The skies churned with shrieking entities, the air reeked of iron and rot. Cultists, corrupted word-bearers, and the monstrous legions of Khorne flooded the streets. Then Kabanda appeared, the bloodthirster of legend, towering and grotesque, its skin like clotted blood and its eyes burning with hunger. It challenged the angel directly, promising glory, strength, and an eternal place beside the blood god. Sanguinius's reply was wordless and absolute. The duel that followed shook the city to its foundations. The Primarch struck first, his blade piercing deep into the demon's chest, but Kabanda's whip coiled around his legs, crushing bone and hurling him to the ground. The angel fell, broken but unyielding. As he lay wounded, Kabanda turned on the Ninth Legion, unleashing carnage beyond imagining. 500 Blood Angels were slain, in a storm of slaughter so violent it tore open reality itself. The blood of the fallen fed the warp, igniting an infernal engine buried beneath the cathedral, a ritual construct known as the Rage Fire. As it roared to life, the ground split and the heavens bled. The trap was complete, and Sanguinius realized too late that he had walked willingly into a vision made real, the descent of angels into the maw of hell. The Rage Fire was the crowning horror of Erebus's design, a psychic engine built not merely to destroy, but to corrupt. Within its heart was a single wretched soul, Brother Terrace of the Blood Angels, once a proud Astartes, now reduced to a mutilated husk. Stolen years before from Fabius Bile's early experiments, Terrace had been stripped of every trace of his former humanity. Pain and fury had hollowed him out, leaving only a vessel of hate. Through him, Erebus channeled the full measure of Chaos's will. When the Rage Fire ignited, it tore open every buried weakness within the Ninth Legion. The long-suppressed flaw, what the Blood Angels called the Red Thirst, was no longer a quiet hunger lurking beneath discipline. It became an inferno. Psychic energy exploded across the battlefield, a pulse of rage that slammed into Sanguinius's soul like a thunderclap. The Primarch staggered and fell unconscious, his mind consumed by the psychic storm. Across the surface of Signus, his sons screamed as the same energy erupted within them. Their control shattered in an instant. What followed was a revelation and a damnation. The flaw was not biological, as Sanguinius had always hoped. It was spiritual, bound to the essence of their being. The Emperor's genetic artistry had been contaminated by something older, something woven through the warp itself. That truth. revealed in an instant, destroyed whatever hope Sanguinius had of curing his legion once the crusade was over. Every restraint, every meditation, every ritual of discipline burned away. The Blood Angels, once paragons of grace and control, descended into primal madness. They ripped apart friend and foe alike with bare hands and teeth, drinking the blood of the fallen as they howled like beasts. Their discipline was gone, their souls eclipsed by hunger. The beautiful sons of Baal had become monsters, their golden armor soaked in gore. From that day, the flaw would never again lie dormant. Its shadow would haunt them forever, taking form in the Black Rage and the Death Company. While Sanguinius lay insensible, First Captain Ralderon and Apothecary Meros led a desperate push toward the heart of the enemy's stronghold, the Cathedral of the Mark. Their path was choked with demons. Shrieking demonettes and roaring bloodletters clawed through the smoke to meet them. The air shimmered with sorcery, and every wall pulsed like living flesh. The Blood Angels, half mad and drenched in frenzy, tore their way forward, guided less by orders than by instinct. Ralderon fought with mechanical precision, even as chaos closed in around him. But their progress came at a terrible cost. The Red Thirst devoured what little sense of unity remained. The Legion became a hurricane of violence without direction. And worse still, allies found themselves caught in the storm. A detachment of space wolves, who had been attached to the expedition as observers, now stood among the targets of their supposed comrades. Alongside them, word-bearer stragglers and surviving human cultists were cut down without mercy. The wolves fought fiercely, but were annihilated, save for a handful of librarians who resisted the madness long enough to perceive what was happening. Bound by the prohibitions of the Council of Nicaea, they hesitated to use their powers. But in the face of such catastrophe, law meant nothing. Defying imperial decree, they unleashed their psychic strength to reach Sanguinius's mind and pull him back from the brink. Their efforts succeeded. The angel stirred once more, but by then, the Ninth Legion had already become a storm too vast to contain. The Blood Angels converged upon the cathedral, an ocean of red fury. No longer a disciplined army, they were a tide of instinct and compulsion, driven by an uncontrollable psychic hunger. The defenders, demons, corrupted Astartes and cultists were no better, their own frenzy matching the madness of their foes. The two forces collided in a grotesque parody of battle. Bolters ran dry, chainswords jammed, and the fighting devolved into raw, bestial slaughter. Warriors bludgeoned each other with broken weapons, tore flesh with gauntlets and fangs. The ground became a slurry of blood and ash. Signus Prime had become a world possessed, and the sons of Sanguinius, those angels once made to redeem mankind, had fallen into the embrace of the very horror they had come to destroy. Chainswords screamed, power fists shattered ceramite, and bare hands tore flesh as the Ninth Legion lost itself completely to the abyss. Astartes, Terminators, even dreadnoughts, beings of near-mythic endurance, were dragged down and crushed beneath the frenzy of their own brothers. The once glorious warriors of the Great Crusade had become avatars of ruin, their noble banners drowned in blood and filth. What unfolded on Signus was an abomination against everything the Imperium claimed to stand for. Many of the defenders who filled the cathedral's ranks were once human, the remnants of Signus Prime's population now twisted into grotesque hosts for demonic entities. Their bodies warped and stretched, becoming prisons for things that could not exist in reality without mortal anchors. The air itself shimmered with unreality, and for any who still possessed reason enough to see it, there was no longer any distinction between demon and angel. The Blood Angels, those luminous, near-divine sons of Sanguinius, had become indistinguishable from the nightmares they fought. The veneer of grace and discipline that once defined them was stripped away, revealing the savagery that had always lurked beneath. Inside the Cathedral of the Mark, Apothecary Meros and Captain Ralderon pressed forward through the carnage, their every step contested by endless tides of shrieking demons. There they found themselves face to face with returning horrors. Kabanda, the Bloodthirster, towering over the battlefield, and the Serpentine Keeper of Secrets, Cuse the Perverse, joined now by a third fiend, Charis, a goat-headed abomination of Slanesh. The demons were exultant, feeding upon the despair of the Blood Angels. Then Raldoran's gaze fell upon a chained figure at the heart of the ritual chamber. "Terrace," he gasped, "captain of the 111th. The broken warrior's mutilated body was barely recognizable. His armor fused with the altar itself. Whatever remained of his soul had long since been consumed. Rage overtook the surviving Blood Angels. They launched themselves at the demons and their word-bearer allies, bolters roaring, chain blades screaming. Raldoran cut down his former comrades turned heretics, and the sight seemed to delight Cuse, who reveled in the violence. The demon blocked their path, seizing the captain and hurling him toward its monstrous kin. Kabanda loomed forward, its whip coiling like a serpent, ready to deliver the killing blow, only to freeze as the heavens themselves seemed to tear open. Sanguinius descended like divine retribution. His wings unfolded in radiant arcs, and his landing struck the marble floor like a thunderclap. To Meros and Raldoran, the sight was beyond comprehension. Their Primarch was not merely alive, he was incandescent with fury. Before any could speak, he was already moving. His blade flashed once, singing through the air to impale Charis against the cathedral's obsidian wall. The Keeper of Secrets shrieked in agony as the weapon pinned it there like a grotesque ornament. Sanguinius was already upon Kabanda. The Bloodthirster's whip lashed downward, but the Primarch raised one wing to block the strike, the impact tearing feathers but drawing no blood. The demon's axe followed, but Sanguinius caught it mid-swing, his strength defying reason. Cuse screamed commands, "Kill him!" But the Angel of Baal had already broken the demon's weapon in his hands. Then came the counterattack. Sanguinius struck with a speed that defied the eye, his fists blurring as they smashed into Kabanda's chest and skull. Black ichor sprayed across the walls. The Bloodthirster, stunned by pain it had never known, roared in disbelief. It raised its whip again, but Sanguinius seized it, turned it, and looped it around the demon's throat. The two titans crashed to the ground in a maelstrom of shattered marble and blood. Kabanda clawed at the coil, but the Primarch only pulled tighter, his expression cold and resolute. The demon tried to unfurl its vast black wings to break free. Sanguinius tore them from its back. The scream that followed was not of rage, but pure, uncomprehending agony. With one final motion, the angel lifted the mutilated creature and hurled it into the warp flame pit at the heart of the cathedral. Fire swallowed the Bloodthirster whole. Sanguinius had triumphed, but victory brought no peace. The damage was already done. The psychic wound within his sons burned unceasingly, their thirst unquenchable, their fury consuming. They would not stop until every trace of chaos upon Signus Prime was annihilated. In purging the demons, they damned themselves further, and from that moment on, the Blood Angels would forever bear the mark of what they had become. Angels, yes, but angels born of blood and ruin. Outside, the world still burned. The skies over Signus Prime were a storm of blood and ash, the ground trembling beneath the fury of rampaging Blood Angels. With Kabanda banished, the greater demon of Slaanesh, Cuse the Perverse, turned from fury to calculation. It had witnessed Sanguinius destroy one of Khorne's greatest champions, and the revelation filled it with both caution and desire. It no longer screamed for the Primarch's death. It wanted instead to claim him. The soft voice of temptation replaced the howling commands of the battlefield. Inside the shattered cathedral, Apothecary Meros and the surviving Blood Angels continued to carve through the remaining traitors. One word-bearer, swollen with demonic influence, lunged toward them but was met by Meros's full wrath. The apothecary's bolter barked once, and then his chainsword finished the work, splitting the heretic's face in two. Signus had become an ocean of blood. Every surface glistened with viscera. The dead lay everywhere, mortal and immortal alike. And yet, amid this horror, the Ninth Legion fought with terrifying precision. What their enemies mistook for madness was, in truth, something far worse: a freedom from restraint. The veneer of civility had been stripped away, revealing the raw, unrelenting potential beneath. They were angels no longer bound by the ideals of the Great Crusade, but unshackled instruments of divine annihilation. The demons began to retreat. Even they understood what true terror looked like when faced with Sanguinius's sons unleashed. In the heart of the sanctum, Hughes sensed its defeat. The laughter that rolled from its serpentine throat was soft, mocking. "Do you think this body matters, Angel?" it hissed. "I can make new flesh whenever I wish." But its voice trembled as Sanguinius strode forward, blade in hand, his armor scorched and torn, his eyes like twin suns of wrath. "You are finished," the Primarch declared. "This war of horrors ends now." The demon smiled. "Ends? No, beloved one. This is your beginning." It sought to exploit Sanguinius's one great vulnerability, his foresight and his compassion. "That construct," Kius whispered, gesturing toward the roaring vortex of the ragefire, "is no mere weapon. It is you, the reflection of your soul, the thirst in your sons, the wrath you deny. Step into it, and your legion will be cured. Embrace the truth, and I will make you whole." For a moment, silence fell. Even the demons seemed to hesitate. Sanguinius stood, his wings folded tight, his expression unreadable. The offer was a lie. Every instinct told him so, but it spoke directly to his deepest pain. He could feel the flaw burning in his sons across the battlefield, their screams echoing in his mind. Perhaps, he thought, if one sacrifice could save them. His hesitation was all the demon needed. The Blood Angels nearby could see it. Their Primarch was actually considering stepping into the vortex. It was then that Apothecary Meros made his decision. Without a word, he broke from the line and sprinted toward the suspended Ragefire construct. In a single motion, he slashed through the cables, holding it aloft, catapulting himself into the vortex. "No!" Sanguinius roared, diving after him, but it was too late. Within the maelstrom of chaos, Meros faced Kius's final temptation. The Apothecary, his flesh burning away, called out to his Primarch, "You cannot take this burden. You have another destiny, to face Horus. I will bear this one." With calm resolve, he tore free his own gene seed, placing it in Sanguinius's hands before the vortex swallowed him. Then, as the fires of the warp consumed him, Meros clung to one thought: vengeance for Taris and love for his legion. Within the storm of hate, he screamed not in surrender but in defiance. The vortex imploded. The Ragefire was destroyed. But within the psychic void left behind, something new was born. The Psykers among the Legion felt it first. A pulse, a presence. Meros was changing. His body twisted in the warp, his armor blackened and split. Wings of blood unfurled from his back. He was no longer man, nor Astartes. He had become something else, a living manifestation of the Blood Angel's curse. When the energies cleared, Sanguinius stood over the ruin of the cathedral, his blade dripping with the ichor of Kius the Perverse, whose severed head lay discarded at his feet. The battle of Signus Prime was over. The demons were gone. The Blood Angels had survived, but at a terrible price. In that moment, the Legion's curse took form, embodied in the new being that the survivors would forever whisper of, the Red Angel. It was not a title of glory, but of grief, a demon-forged avatar born from the Apothecary's sacrifice, a mirror of the Legion's soul. It was both their salvation and their eternal reminder of the darkness that lived within them. From that point onward, the being known as the Red Angel faded from the chronicles of major events, yet whispers claimed it later appeared aboard the Vengeful Spirit, presented to Horus himself. Some accounts even place its warped image among the infamous gathering of the Traitor Lords, immortalized in art as a symbol of what the Blood Angels had endured and unleashed. The tragedy of Signus Prime marked more than a victory. It was the true beginning of Sanguinius's path toward martyrdom. For the first time, he was forced to confront an unbearable truth. The visions of his own death and the curse of his sons were inseparably bound. What he had dismissed as a potential flaw of genetics was revealed to be something infinitely deeper. A psychic wound, threaded through the soul of the Ninth Legion. The red thirst was not a sickness of the flesh, but of the spirit. Any hope of a cure had been naive. It was part of them, as integral as their loyalty or their beauty. Perhaps deep down, Sanguinius had always known this. It would explain his reluctance to bring the matter before the Emperor, choosing instead to hide it behind layers of ceremony, discipline, and denial. But on Signus Prime, all illusions were stripped away. The duel with Kabanda served as a testament to the angel's endurance. Cast down, bones shattered, wings torn, he rose again. Even as the demon's power dwarfed that of mortal comprehension, Sanguinius refused to yield. That same defiance, that strength of will, would define his final stand upon Terra. Signus Prime was both a calamity and a crucible. The campaign itself was brutal, but not complex. Its true significance lay not in strategy or conquest, but in revelation, how it exposed, purified, and transformed the Blood Angels. For Sanguinius and his sons, this was the moment they saw their true selves. The Ninth Legion's reputation for nobility and restraint had always concealed an undercurrent of savagery. Now, that duality was made undeniable. Each Primarch embodied a distinct archetype: Guilliman's reason and order, Perturabo's cold precision, Angron's fury, Horus's charm and cunning. But Sanguinius was defined by vision and unrelenting determination. No matter the despair surrounding him, he compelled others to rise, through faith, through beauty, through the conviction that there was always something worth saving. At Signus, that ideal was tested to its limit. His sons had become monsters, their angelic grace drowned in blood, and yet he still saw in them a future worth redeeming. It was his strength and his curse, the belief that redemption was possible even when all evidence said otherwise. From that point forward, the Blood Angels carried invisible wounds that would never heal. The Red Thirst was no longer a myth whispered among officers or suppressed in battle reports. It was awake, fully and forever. They had looked into the heart of their flaw and survived, but survival came at the cost of innocence. Sanguinius knew then that his destiny was sealed. He had glimpsed his death long before, but after Signus, he understood its meaning. His end was not his own to decide. The Emperor's angel would die not in despair but in sacrifice, and he would not die alone. For as much as he lifted his sons from the abyss, he also bound their fate to his own. When he fell, so too would they share the echo of that fall, generation after generation. The campaign of Signus, though small in tactical scope, was monumental in spiritual consequence. For the Blood Angels, it was not merely a battlefield. It was the birthplace of their enduring myth, a place where they were unmasked and reborn. For Sanguinius, it was confirmation, the final seal on a truth he could no longer deny. And so, when he later faced Horus in the echoing halls of the Vengeful Spirit, his acceptance was already complete. The angel had seen his doom, embraced it, and understood that martyrdom was the only path left. The rest of his journey, through the void, to Terra, to the final battle, was simply the carrying out of that revelation. As later chroniclers would record in Echoes of Eternity, Saturnine, and the other final volumes of the heresy, the details of those last moments expanded upon what Signus had already written in blood. By the time the siege of Terra began, the story of Sanguinius was no longer one of discovery, but of inevitability. His character was complete. The angel who had seen his death, accepted his curse, and still chose to stand in the light. After the nightmare of Signus Prime, the Blood Angels found themselves in a hollow aftermath. The demons had been banished, but the victory tasted of ash. They had seen their faith tested, their purity shattered, and their flaw laid bare before the galaxy. What does a legion do after its greatest fears are realized? What remains when loyalty has been manipulated and the soul itself corrupted? For Sanguinius and his sons, the only path left was forward. In the broader scope of the heresy, the novels that chart their journey from fear to tread to the siege of Terra, Unremembered Empire, Pharos, Angels of Caliban, and Ruinstorm, trace this long, arduous road of recovery, revelation, and renewed purpose. After Signus, Sanguinius intended to make directly for Terra, his course set by duty and the visions that haunted him. Yet Erebus's great atrocity, the Ruinstorm, made that impossible. The warp raged across the galaxy like a living wound, cutting all routes to the Sol system. Real space itself became treacherous, its laws distorted, its paths swallowed by madness. The Emperor's sons and their armies were scattered, unable to regroup. Through this chaos, it was the Pharos beacon on Sotha that guided Sanguinius and his fleet to the realm of Ultramar. There, Robert Guilliman was forging something unthinkable: the Imperium Secundus, a contingency empire born from uncertainty. Believing Terra might have already fallen, Guilliman sought to preserve civilization in his own domain. The arrival of Sanguinius, followed by the Lionel Johnson and his Dark Angels, transformed that vision into something larger, a triumvirate of loyalist Primarchs ruling over a fragile echo of the Imperium. But for all its order and grandeur, Imperium Secundus was haunted by doubt. None of them knew whether the Emperor lived or if Terra still stood. Their uneasy alliance was shadowed by guilt and grief. Sanguinius, though radiant in spirit, was tormented by the same visions that had haunted him on Signus: the inevitability of his death and the blood curse consuming his sons. He could not rest, not even in this sanctuary of reason and stability. These events unfold across Pharos and Angels of Caliban, where we see the uneasy interplay of the three Primarchs: Guilliman, the strategist and reformer; the Lion, the secretive hunter; and Sanguinius, the visionary martyr who alone carried both faith and foresight. Angels of Caliban in particular provides a powerful glimpse into their dynamic and the strain of leadership under cosmic isolation. While Guilliman tried to preserve civilization through structure and the Lion through secrecy, Sanguinius carried the burden of destiny. His foresight was both a gift and a torment, confirming what he could not change. It is in this period that one of the heresy's most revealing exchanges occurs: the meeting between the three loyalist Primarchs and their captive, Conrad Kurz. The Night Haunter had been hunted across Ultramar and finally captured by the Lion, who intended to execute him for his endless atrocities. But as they stood ready to deliver judgment, Kurz began to speak of his visions. He foretold his own death, not at the Lion's hand but by an assassin sent by the Emperor. The Lion scoffed, but when Kurz reminded them of a prophecy already fulfilled, his sword broken in battle, the chamber fell silent. Guilliman dismissed it as manipulation, but Sanguinius listened. The Lion pressed the point. If Kurz's prophecy of his own death required the Emperor's assassin, then the Emperor must still live. That single conclusion shattered months of hopeless speculation. For Sanguinius, it was revelation wrapped in inevitability. His own death, seen countless times in his foresight, could not occur unless he reached Terra, meaning his journey through the ruin storm was fated to succeed. Hope and doom intertwined. The realization rekindled purpose among the Loyalists. The Imperium Secundus, born of despair, now became a launching point for redemption. As Kurz laughed at Guilliman's careful plans and the chaos that his perfect empire had already begun to breed, Sanguinius prepared for what came next. The ruin storm itself, Erebus's blasphemous wound in the fabric of reality, remained the last obstacle between them and Terra. When the Loyalist fleets gathered to pierce the storm, they discovered that within its heart lay Davin, the same world where Horus had fallen to chaos. Drawn there by fate or design, the three Primarchs descended upon that cursed planet. What followed was a symbolic confrontation as much as a literal one. Sanguinius faced again the same choice he had made at Signus: to sacrifice, to redeem, to endure. Once more he offered himself, his blood, his strength, and through that act, the path through the ruin storm opened. Davin was purged, annihilated, but not before the Blood Angel's Primarch glimpsed visions of his own end with renewed clarity. The storm began to dissipate, and the way to Terra was revealed. The Loyalists could finally advance. Yet for Sanguinius, the knowledge was both blessing and burden. The Emperor lived, but so too did the destiny that awaited him upon the Vengeful Spirit. The road to his martyrdom was now fully set, and the Angel, luminous and weary, took flight into the storm. The Lion proposed a plan born of ruthless pragmatism. His Dark Angels would strike like ghosts across the traitor-held territories, burning their supply worlds and dragging Horus's forces into a scattered chase. Guilliman, commanding the largest host of Imperial strength, would act as the hammer, driving directly against any foe that sought to intercept them. And Sanguinius, the fastest and most gifted among them, would make all speed through the still-raging ruin storm to Terra itself. Each understood the risks. Each knew the odds were almost hopeless. But Sanguinius had no choice. His visions gave him no peace, only an ever-closer certainty of what awaited him at the end of his path. The angel could not sleep. His foresight had long shown his own death at Horus's hands, and though he had accepted that truth, he refused to accept its meaning as Conrad Kurz would have, as proof that all was fated and futile. To Sanguinius, destiny might set the stage, but choice still determined the play. If his death was unavoidable, then he would shape its purpose. If fate demanded sacrifice, then he would ensure it was not meaningless. He believed even Horus could still be redeemed. That belief, fragile as it was, sustained him. But the red thirst grew stronger within him, creeping closer to the surface. The curse that had consumed his sons at Signus now stirred in his own veins. He fought it constantly, fearing that the same madness would one day claim him. Still, when the Blood Angel's crimson warships finally broke through the veil of the ruin storm into the Sol system, the psychic roar that spread through the Imperium was overwhelming. Across Terra, astropathic choirs wept tears of relief. Fleets in orbit signaled their allegiance anew, and battered armies on the ground raised their banners high. The angel had returned. Sanguinius wasted no time. He met with the Sigillite and the Primarchs already present, bringing unity and morale in a time of despair. Even in exhaustion, his presence rekindled faith in the cause. His words inspired mortals and demigods alike. Yet his attention was already fixed on the inevitable confrontation to come. When Leman Russ declared his intent to meet Horus head-on, to delay or destroy him before he could reach Terra, Sanguinius counseled against it. The final battle, he told him, will always be on Terra. That is where it must end. He could not explain fully why, perhaps he simply knew. Or perhaps, as with all his visions, he had already seen it. His counsel proved prophetic. In the meantime, he and his legion joined one of the greatest engagements of the heresy, the Battle of Beta Garman, known to later ages as Titan Death. The cluster of Beta Garman worlds had long been one of humanity's hidden strongholds, settled during the Dark Age of technology and, miraculously, surviving much of the Age of Strife intact. It was a region of ancient human mastery, a bastion of pre-imperial science, industry, and defense. Strategically, it was the keystone between the outer sectors and the Sol system. Whoever controlled it would control the approach to Terra. But more than its location, Beta Garman was vital for another reason. Within its system were warp routes unusually stable, relics of an older human age when the warp itself had been less hostile. Around Uranus and Pluto lay the ancient Ilion and Chthonic gates, massive artificial constructs that once allowed safe passage between real space and the immaterium. The Mechanicum claimed them to be remnants of the Dark Age, perhaps even predating the Imperium entirely. Unlike modern warp translation, which relied on the agony of navigators, these gates offered smooth transitions, stable corridors through the tides of unreality. Though few dared to use them now, their presence created focal points of relative calm in the otherwise chaotic approach to Terra. Such rare stability made Beta Garman a magnet for war. Horus knew this and unleashed the Alpha Legion first, sending them ahead as saboteurs and assassins. Their infiltration was surgical, their goal not conquest but collapse. They sowed fear, confusion, and disinformation across the cluster. Assassinations decapitated command hierarchies, and sabotage crippled supply chains. Then came the real assault, the arrival of the Emperor's children, descending like predators into the chaos the Alpha Legion had prepared. The skies turned purple and gold as Fulgrim's warriors descended, bringing with them their monstrous allies, the corrupted titans of Legio Mortis. Their opening bombardments shattered defenses, silenced orbital platforms, and left entire continents burning. The Imperial response was immediate but desperate. Rogel Dorn ordered the Imperial Fists and Salamanders to counter the invasion at the fortress world of Nurkon City, a sprawling metropolis turned into a labyrinth of steel and concrete. What followed was one of the largest Titan battles in the entire heresy. god machines the size of mountains clashed amid cities that became molten wastelands. The sound of their weapons was like thunder rolling across worlds. Thousands of lives were erased in seconds. Entire legios were annihilated. Even by the grim standards of the age, the losses were catastrophic. Too many Titans lost, too many irreplaceable engines destroyed. The Loyalists held, but at a cost that could scarcely be endured. And still, the shadow of Horus advanced, his fleets gathering beyond the veil, his storm closing in. Sanguinius knew what this meant. The long war was entering its final movement. The curtain was rising on the tragedy he had foreseen since the beginning. The Angel of Baal prepared to meet his destiny. One final flight, one final act of faith against the darkness. After months of relentless bloodletting, the slaughter at Beta Garman reached a breaking point. The traitor hosts could no longer maintain their footholds, though the Loyalists were scarcely better off. As the ruin storm finally began to weaken, long-awaited reinforcements pushed through the warp to join the battle. But their arrival did little to alter the balance. If anything, it only prolonged the agony. The front lines blurred into a nightmarish stalemate where loyalties fractured and human soldiers, desperate to survive, defected to the traitors in droves. The scale of the conflict defied belief. Across the Beta Garman cluster, more Titans clashed than would ever be fielded again, even more than during the Siege of Terra itself. Rogel Dorn, ever the architect of defense, had deliberately withheld most of the god machines from Terra, fearing that their immense destructive potential posed as great a threat to the Imperial Palace as to the enemy. But on Beta Garman, he imposed no such restraint. Here, the Titans were unleashed without limit, and the result was annihilation on an almost unimaginable scale. The Loyalist forces deployed an astonishing 27 Titan legios, entire battle groups, not isolated maniples, supported by more than 20 knight houses from both Imperial and Mechanicum origins. Alongside them marched the armies of Man and the legions of the Emperor, the Blood Angels, the White Scars, the Imperial Fists, and the Salamanders. The traitors, for their part, matched this fury in full. They brought their own corrupted Titan legios, their knight houses, and their elite Astartes legions, the Sons of Horus, the Iron Warriors, the Word-Bearers, and the Emperor's children. The result was not a battle but an apocalypse. Cities were flattened under the feet of Titans, and entire continents vanished beneath the constant detonations of plasma, melta, and void weaponry. Coordination broke down amid the chaos. Loyalist commanders feuded over rank and authority. Titan princeps balked at taking orders from other legions. By contrast, the traitors operated with brutal simplicity. They needed no unity beyond hatred. Each sought destruction, each sought favor from their dark masters, and in their savage rivalry they tore worlds apart. The fighting raged without order or mercy. Reinforcements came too late and too scattered to restore coherence to the Imperial defense. When at last Sanguinius arrived with his Blood Angels and Jagatai Khan's White Scars, they found only carnage. The Angel immediately assumed command, rallying the surviving forces and attempting to impose a semblance of structure on the chaos. On Beta Garman II, his arrival ignited the most devastating engagement of all. There, amid the cracked plains and glassed seas, the Blood Angels and their allies joined with more than 30 Titan legios in an attempt to reclaim the world for the Imperium. Over 1,000 god engines strode the battlefield, their silhouettes towering against skies of fire. The ground quaked as they exchanged salvos, each blast capable of erasing cities. When the engines fell, they did not merely die. They collapsed into mountains of wreckage, their reactors carving new craters into the already mutilated world. When it was over, it was said a man could walk from one horizon to the other without ever touching soil, only the twisted carcasses of Titans and the bones of the fallen. And yet, even this cataclysm had been a deception. The real target of Horus's campaign was not Beta Garman II, but Beta Garman III, a critical relay world housing the Imperium's primary astropathic communication nexus for the sector. While the Loyalists exhausted themselves reclaiming shattered ground, Horus struck decisively. Leading his own Sons of Horus and 100 Titans of Legio Mortis, he fell upon the world like a storm. The defenders fought with desperate valor, But the planet was overwhelmed. Within days, the communication center was obliterated. The Loyalists' network was crippled. Their ability to coordinate the defense of the Sol system was shattered. Sanguinius and Khan, realizing the trap too late, were forced to order a retreat. What followed was a withdrawal in name only, chaotic, blood-soaked, and brutal. Columns of retreating Loyalists were harried by traitor ambushes at every turn. Supplies were abandoned, wounded left behind. Entire fleets burned as they fled toward Terra. When at last the survivors emerged from the Beta Garmin cluster, their fleets were broken and their strength halved. Horus had achieved everything he intended: the destruction of the Imperial communication relay, the decimation of the Loyalist forces, and control of the final approach to the Sol system. The Titan death had lived up to its name. Billions lay dead. Hundreds of God engines silenced forever. The campaign's devastation ranked among the worst in all human history, its losses staggering even by the standards of the Horus heresy. For the Loyalists, it was more than a defeat. It was humiliation, a bitter reminder that the War Master's reach had grown unstoppable. The road to Terra now lay open. As the survivors regrouped, their faces hollow with exhaustion, Sanguinius turned his gaze sunward. He knew what awaited him. The moment he had foreseen so many times was no longer a distant vision. It was reality, drawing near like a shadow over the throne world. Rogel Dorn's Imperial fists had already begun fortifying the palace, turning it into a bastion of last resort. The end was coming, and the Angel of Baal could feel destiny closing its wings around him. Jagatai Khan deployed his white scars as swift, mobile counterattackers, weaving their unpredictable assaults through Rogel Dorn's intricate web of fortifications around the Imperial Palace. When the Blood Angels arrived, they were folded seamlessly into Dorn's grand defense strategy, each legion positioned like pieces in a desperate, cosmic game of survival. Sanguinius and his sons filled the bastions and war sectors, their crimson armor gleaming amid the dust and ruin. Yet behind the disciplined formations lingered questions no tactician could answer. What fate awaited the Angel and his legion? Had the mark of Signus Prime forever scarred them? Could Sanguinius hold back the black rage threatening to consume his sons and himself? And most hauntingly, could he still change the fate of Horus? Or was the doom they all foresaw now unchangeable? The siege of Terra defied mortal comprehension. The traitors' assault was ceaseless, their bombardment an unending storm that pounded the palace walls with fire and thunder. Dorn's defenses groaned under the strain. Wave after wave of chaos-warped warriors, mutants, and enslaved mortals threw themselves against the walls, dying by the millions in the name of a false god. For the defenders, there was no rest. No reprieve, only duty. For the 9th Legion, that duty meant being sent wherever the line threatened to break. The Blood Angels became the Emperor's hammer and shield, a living wall of red and gold that met every incursion with savage efficiency. They fought with a grace so fierce it verged on madness. Chainswords carved arcs of crimson light, bolters roared like thunderclaps in cathedral halls of steel. But beneath their valor, the old flaw stirred. The red thirst, the psychic hunger that had haunted them since Signus, flowed through their veins like wildfire. The longer the battle dragged on, the harder it became to suppress. Even Sanguinius felt it, an ache in the soul, a pull toward fury and blood. His will alone held the 9th from collapsing into full madness, yet with every hour, that restraint frayed. The siege pushed them past endurance, dragging them ever closer to the edge of the Black Rage. It was during these grim days that prophecy turned to reality. Upon the shattered outer walls, amid the shriek of artillery and the roar of titans, Sanguinius faced Angron, the Red Angel of Chaos, his fallen brother. Their duel, long foreshadowed by vision and word, became one of the most brutal confrontations of the heresy. The two Primarchs clashed like gods amid the ruins, one embodying the pure, disciplined fury of righteous wrath, the other a creature of unbound destruction. It was not merely a battle of strength but of essence, brother against brother, angel against beast. Yet Sanguinius saw something beyond the carnage. His foresight, now sharpened to near omniscience, allowed him to glimpse not only the field but the mind of Angren himself. Through the eyes of his brother, he saw the world of Nuceria, the cradle of Angren's torment, burning under bombardment from the Dark Angels. From this vision, Sanguinius knew two truths: that the Lion still lived, and that his grim campaign of destruction was unfolding just as planned, drawing enemy attention away from Terra. Still, the revelation brought little comfort. The palace was dying. The outer bastions fell one by one. The walls cracked, the air choked with ash and screams. The defenders were driven back toward the Eternity Gate, the sacred entrance to the Sanctum Imperialis where the Emperor himself resided. Here, Sanguinius was tasked with leading the final defense. If the gate fell, the throne would be exposed. It was the last line, the final stand. And as if drawn by destiny, the nightmare from Signus returned. From the smoke and ruin, a shape began to form, stitched from corpses, armored in the broken remains of blood angels it had slain long ago. The air itself twisted in revulsion as a familiar voice echoed through the warp. Kabanda. The greater demon of Khorne had clawed its way back into reality, reborn from death and vengeance. Its massive frame loomed over the battlefield, wings slick with blood, its whip and axe crackling with infernal power. The Ninth Legion froze for a heartbeat as they recognized their ancient nemesis, the very monster that had damned them at Signus. Its presence was blasphemy incarnate. The demon strode toward the Eternity Gate, every step shaking the marble foundations. Around it surged a tide of lesser demons, bloodletters, warp spawn, and horrors without name, pouring through fractures in the palace's walls like vermin through a corpse. Kabanda bellowed a challenge, its voice a thunderclap of hatred. It had come not for conquest, but for vengeance, to feast upon the Blood Angels' souls, to drink deep of their agony, and to deliver the angel's heart to the Blood God. The defenders met it in a storm of fire and fury. Bolters roared, flamers turned the air into sheets of burning promethium. But the creature was unstoppable. It tore through ranks of Astartes, scattering them like straw, devouring the spirits of the fallen as it advanced. Every blow it struck echoed the sins of Signus. The Ninth bled, but they did not yield. They had carried the stain of that cursed world for too long to fall now. To them, Kabanda's return was not merely another battle, it was reckoning. Amid the chaos, Sanguinius stood tall upon the steps of the Eternity Gate, his wings blackened by soot, his sword burning with light. The angel's gaze met the demons across the flames. The time had come to end the nightmare that had begun so long ago. The Reaper of the Ninth had returned, and the angel would face it, even if it cost him his final breath. The defense of the Eternity Gate stands among the most pivotal events of the entire Horus heresy, matched only by the final confrontation aboard the Vengeful Spirit. Its importance was not merely tactical, but deeply symbolic. Both Malcador and the Emperor had long foreseen that this gate would mark the final threshold between humanity's survival and utter annihilation. It was the choke point of all destiny, the last wall before the sanctum of the Master of Mankind, the place where the physical war would end and the true battle for the soul of the Imperium would begin. To close the Eternity Gate was to accept a grim truth, that the outer defenses of the Imperial Palace had fallen, and that the enemy now clawed at the very heart of Terra. Yet beyond its strategic significance, the gate carried a meaning far more profound. It embodied hope, a fragile, flickering hope that if the defenders could hold this line, then perhaps humanity might endure. Once sealed, the gate would sever the living from the doomed. It was both an act of salvation and surrender, a moment when the Imperium literally and symbolically shut the door on all outside, consigning them to slaughter at the hands of demons and traitors so that a single chance for survival might remain within. Reinforcements would be impossible once the gate closed. Even the most valiant could not return. Every soul beyond its threshold was already marked for death. Thus, when the order came from the custodians to declare the gate lost, Sanguinius simply refused. "No," the angel said, and his word was law. For the Blood Angels, the defense of the Eternity Gate was not a battle. It was destiny itself, and destiny had come for them in the form of an old nightmare. Kabanda. The greater demon of Khorne had clawed its way back from the abyss, fueled by humiliation and hunger for revenge. Banished once before by Sanguinius at Signus Prime, it had languished in the desolate wastes of the warp, feeding upon scraps of tormented souls. Then Khorne himself had set it a new challenge, to reap a harvest of blood angel souls in atonement for its failure. The demon needed no tally. It could feel their deaths in the warp as it advanced, each soul feeding its unholy strength. Now it stood once more before the angel, its monstrous frame rising above the ruined gates, surrounded by a storm of slaughter. This was no chance encounter. It was the culmination of hatred. Both had defeated the other once before. Both knew only one could walk away from this field. Their exchange began not with blows but with venomous words. Sanguinius mocked Kabanda's arrogance, daring it to die again by his hand. The demon sneered in reply, goading the Primarch with the promise that it would feast upon the blood of his sons until the end of time. The barbs cut deep, and then words gave way to war. Sanguinius launched into the air, wings flaring with light, blade raised in defiance. Kabanda's whip cracked across the battlefield, seizing him mid-flight and dragging him down in a thunderous impact that shook the marble foundations of the gate. Around them, the battle raged. World Eaters howled, Blood Angels roared, and Chaos Marines clashed with Custodians in a maelstrom of fire and blood. But all eyes turned to the duel at the center of it all. The clash of angel and demon silenced the battlefield with awe. They struck with speed and fury beyond comprehension, the air itself splitting beneath the weight of their blows. The demon's axe screamed through the void, carving deep wounds into the marble walls, while Sanguinius answered with the precision of divine wrath. Again and again they collided, wings against claws, sword against talon, until the sky itself seemed to burn from their fury. Sanguinius darted forward, faster than sight, his sword a streak of radiant gold. The blade struck home, tearing across the demon's face and opening it to the bone, shearing one of its eyes from its skull. Kabanda roared in agony, its blood spraying like molten iron. In a single motion, it retaliated, its massive fist crashing into Sanguinius with bone-shattering force. The angel was hurled backward, slamming into a broken statue of the Emperor, the marble shattering beneath his weight. But he rose again, bleeding, battered, unbroken. Kabanda turned its rage upon the ninth, tearing through squads of blood angels and scattering them like chaff. Bolter fire hammered against its hide to no effect. Even tank shells and plasma bursts barely slowed it. The demon cut a fellblade in half with a single sweep of its axe, its armor glowing red-hot from the effort, then spun through the haze, weaving between streams of lasfire with a monstrous grace that defied all sense. The duel was no longer merely a contest of strength. It was vengeance incarnate, the echo of Signus reborn at the very gates of the Emperor's palace. The battle for the Eternity Gate reached a fevered crescendo, the air thick with smoke, ozone, and the metallic tang of blood. The sons of Sanguinius threw themselves against Kabanda's towering form, their bolters and chainswords little more than pinpricks against the demon's infernal hide. Yet they fought on, not for victory but for defiance. They would not allow their father to stand alone. Over the Vox, Sanguinius's voice cut through the chaos, calm, resolute, filled with the weight of destiny. He ordered his sons to hold their lines, to restrain the World Eaters from joining the melee, to keep Angron's berserkers at bay. The duel between angel and demon was his alone, and then, once more, the angel took flight. His great wings spread, scattering ash and fire in their wake. Kabanda roared and followed, a mountain of flesh and rage hurtling upward after the blinding spear of light that was Sanguinius. The heavens themselves seemed to crack as they collided, claw and sword striking with the force of orbital bombardments. Then, in a flash of radiant fury, Sanguinius hurled his spear. It tore through the demon's chest, a streak of gold and flame that erupted from its back in a storm of ichor. For a heartbeat, the creature hung suspended, impaled upon light itself. Perhaps in that moment, Sanguinius already saw beyond this battle to his destined meeting with Horus, and knew he must survive. He granted Kabanda the one thing it desired most, a glorious death. The two figures crashed together, locked in a spiral of violence that tore through the sky. The hilt of Sanguinius's sword slammed into the demon's spine, cracking bone and armor alike. Warp-forged ichor spilled forth like molten tar, laced with the trapped souls of the damned, shrieking as they escaped. Kabanda's scream split the air as its wings buckled, its form collapsing in ruin. The angel descended after it, seized the creature by its broken horns, and hurled its corpse down upon the oncoming horde of traitors. The monstrous body crashed through marble stairways and shattered columns, scattering chaos warriors like insects. Even the traitors faltered for a moment at the sight of one of Khorne's greatest champions cast down. But demons know no fear. They surged forward again, howling, feeding upon the scent of the angel's blood. Sanguinius landed before the Eternity Gate, his wings scorched, his armor cracked and smeared with gore. He knelt only for an instant, exhausted, trembling, but still unbroken. The command to withdraw echoed through the Vox. Custodians and Astartes pulled back toward the gate as its immense adamantine doors began to close. The ground quaked with their grinding descent. Then came the Titans. From the smoke and ruins strode the god engines of Legio Audax, the warhound Titans known for their relentless ferocity. Their Ursus claws, harpoon-like siege weapons, fired in unison. The massive cables shot across the battlefield and struck the great doors with thunderous force. The claws bit deep, embedding themselves in the adamantine surface. The Titans dug in their claws, their reactor hearts pulsing as they pulled. Chains screamed, hydraulics howled, and the gate shuddered. The closing halted, its immense frame groaning as the warhounds strained to tear it open. Inside, desperate shouts rose over the Vox. The defenders watched in horror as the impossible played out before them. The door to the Emperor's sanctum, wrenched back by brute strength and heretical will. Above it all, a burning light streaked down from the heavens. A meteor shaped like a man trailing wings of flame. The skies themselves seemed to scream. Sanguinius looked up and knew. It was him. Angron. The Red Angel had come at last. But this was not the brother Sanguinius had once known. Angron was now something far beyond mortal or Primarch. His flesh fused with brass, his wings molten with warp fire, his eyes twin furnaces of hate. He had ascended, his body the manifestation of all rage and torment given form. The demon Primarch struck the ground like an orbital bombardment, sending shockwaves through the ranks of both sides. The earth split beneath him. He rose, wreathed in smoke, laughing through broken fangs as Sanguinius stepped forward to meet him. Their confrontation, chronicled in echoes of eternity, was apocalyptic in scale. Blades sang. Fire fell. The Ninth Legion fought and died around them in a storm of fury as two gods of war collided. Sanguinius hurled his spear. It struck Angron full in the face, shattering teeth, tongue, and jaw before bursting through the back of his skull. The demon crashed down, crushing Astartes beneath his bulk, then rose again, laughing, mocking pain itself. He allowed the angel's sword to pierce his chest, feigning defeat, then seized Sanguinius by the throat. With a roar that shook the heavens, Angron drove his massive brass blade through the Primarch's torso, impaling him to the ground. Over the Vox of the warp, Horus's voice whispered, urging Angron to let him die. But Angron was beyond command, lost to his madness. He did not see the elegant, blood-soaked hand of Sanguinius reach upward. The angel's fingers found the cables of the butcher's nails protruding from Angron's skull. With a cry of fury and pity combined, Sanguinius tore. The world seemed to stop. Angron screamed, not in rage but in clarity, his mind. For one fleeting instant, his own. In Sanguinius's eyes, he saw not judgment, but a mirror. The dark angel, the destroyer, the embodiment of purity within fury. Envy flickered across the demon's face, his last human thought. As they fell together, Sanguinius ripped the nails free from his brother's brain. Warp fire erupted from Angron's skull. The laughter of Khorne thundered across the Imperium as his favored son was unmade. The Red Angel's head exploded in a storm of molten brass and psychic flame. When the smoke cleared, Sanguinius still stood, battered, bleeding, triumphant. The angel had slain the demon king. Yet even he knew, this was not victory. It was merely one reprieve in the march toward his final destiny. Acidic blood hissed as it ate into the marble beneath Sanguinius's feet, the air thick with the stench of burning flesh and ozone. The Primarch stood, his armor cracked and blackened, clutching the torn bio-augment cables of Angron's butcher's nails, still dripping with fragments of his brother's brain. Around him, chaos erupted in its purest form. The World Eaters, robbed of their master, did not falter or despair. They simply broke, their already fractured minds shattered entirely, consumed by madness too great even for them to bear. In a frenzy beyond reason, they turned their chain axes upon all within reach, traitor, demon, or fellow legionary. They tore apart anything that moved, shrieking in ecstatic rage, bellowing the mantra of their god. Blood for the blood god! Kill! Maim! Burn! Their chant rose above the thunder of battle, a hideous hymn to annihilation. Sanguinius stood amid it all, a lone figure of bleeding radiance, watching as the traitor legions devoured themselves. The betrayal had come full circle. The destroyers now destroyed each other. Even the custodians, battle-hardened beyond comprehension, hesitated in awe and horror. The Vox crackled with orders to seal the Eternity Gate. The angel did not move. His sons rushed to him, returning his weapons, their armor scarred and their eyes hollow from the endless slaughter. Sanguinius turned his gaze toward the gate, still partially open, bound by the great chains of the Warhound Titans that had pierced it. He severed those bindings with a single stroke of his sword, the chain links snapping apart in sparks of molten steel. For a heartbeat, he paused. In his hand still hung the mangled remains of Angron's neural implants, the physical manifestation of his brother's torment. He looked upon them one last time, then let them fall to the blood-soaked ground. He turned, wings unfurling, eyes fixed toward the horizon. He knew where his path would lead. His fate awaited him. The siege had reached its endgame. The end and the death, the culmination of the entire saga, stood at hand. And in this final act, the storytelling itself mirrored the cosmos it described. Vast, labyrinthine, and demanding of all who dared approach it. Unlike most chronicles of the heresy, which could be consumed in fragments, this final trilogy was different. It was not a beginning, but the sum of every thread woven through the long tapestry of betrayal and brotherhood. It was the closing of the circle, the crown of the Black Library's mythos, a work of staggering intricacy and devotion, meant only for those who had walked the long road of the heresy. As the last walls of the Imperial Palace burned, Horus made his move. The shields of the Vengeful Spirit fell. The act was deliberate, an invitation, a challenge. Come and end this, it said. Everyone knew it was a trap, even Horus himself. But it was a trap the Emperor could not ignore. Somewhere beyond strategy and reason lay the inevitability of destiny. The Emperor, Sanguinius, and the remnants of their loyal sons prepared to board the flagship of the War Master, knowing full well it might be their tomb. Sanguinius had seen this moment countless times in his visions. Since Signus Prime, he had dreamed of his brother's face, once noble, now monstrous, twisted by the warp into something unrecognizable. He had long accepted that these visions were not simply warnings, but preordained moments carved into the bones of fate. The Emperor had pleaded with him to remain behind, to preserve what strength remained to the 9th Legion, but the angel refused. "Father," he had said, "I must be there. This is where I have always been meant to stand." He had learned from his dark reflections with Conrad Kurza that foresight was both chain and compass. It binds as much as it guides. The path could not be changed, only walked. Thus, he went willingly into the heart of the storm. The Vengeful Spirit was no longer a ship of metal and corridors. It had become a living abomination, a maze of flesh, madness, and sorcery. Its halls twisted into impossible geometries, dripping with the ichor of reality itself. Doors breathed. Bulkheads whispered. The air shimmered with psychic malignance. The loyalist boarding force was immediately scattered. each warrior drawn down a path shaped by his own fears and fate. Time and space had no meaning. Custodians and Astartes alike vanished into corridors that folded back upon themselves, emerging into nightmares of their own making. Even the Emperor's chosen struggled beneath the oppressive weight of the warp. They had entered not a battlefield, but a trap crafted by the mind of a god. Rogel Dorn was lost entirely, cast into a desert of time and thought, wandering lifetimes in isolation. Others were devoured whole by the ship's pulsating walls. Sanguinius walked alone, his every step echoing through the haunted labyrinth. The shadows whispered names, Horus's voice among them, mocking, familiar. Then came the ghost of Ferrus Manus, conjured by Horus's will, twisted into a weapon of guilt. The apparition tormented him, leading him toward the inevitable meeting he had foreseen for years. Alone, bleeding, and weary beyond words, the Angel of Baal entered the final chamber. There, upon the blackened dais of his flagship, stood Horus, the War Master, the brother, the betrayer. The moment had come. The end of all things was at hand. When Sanguinius finally beheld his brother, what stood before him was no longer a man. Horus had become a blazing monstrosity, a living god of annihilation wrapped in the relics of a fallen age. His armor pulsed with warp energy, etched in obscene runes that shimmered like molten scripture. Power dripped from him in waves, every breath a distortion of reality. And yet, behind the horror, Sanguinius still recognized the face of the brother he had once loved. Twisted, yes, but not gone. Horus smiled, his voice a honeyed mockery of the warmth it once held, and offered Sanguinius a place beside him. He spoke of freedom from fear, of the warp as liberation, not corruption. The angel listened, his expression calm and pained, then simply said that what stood before him was not his brother. The words stung. Horus's smile faltered. He boasted of his transformation, declaring that his change was power, not damnation. Then came his final temptation. Join me. In reply, Sanguinius raised his sword. The duel that followed was like nothing either had imagined. The angel struck first, a blur of incandescent fury. He moved like light given form. A raptor descended from heaven. His blows fell in endless succession, each one ringing across the corrupted steel of the Vengeful Spirit. Sparks cascaded, and the deck beneath their feet melted beneath the hammering of their weapons. Horus's shield generators screamed under the onslaught, each strike threatening to shatter their warp-fed fields. The War Master retaliated, his immense mace descending with the weight of a dying sun. When it struck, the impact thundered through the ship, liquefying metal and air alike. What unfolded was no mortal combat. It was a godly duel beyond the limits of comprehension. The angel's movements blurred into impossibility, his body bending through speeds that the eye could not follow. Even the ship's sensors failed to track them. As a remembrance once wrote, "To see such beings fight was to confront a truth the human mind could not accept, that these creatures were never meant to exist in flesh." Sanguinius fought as though every heartbeat might be his last, wielding speed and foresight to anticipate each swing of the mace, every twist of Horus's monstrous form. He provoked his brother with precision, drawing upon millennia of shared knowledge, every lesson learned, every weakness known, to lure him into a mistake. For a time, it worked. Horus grew impatient, his movements slowing, his breath harsh and uneven. The angel darted in and out, carving deep gashes across his armor, slicing at the seams between plates. He struck across Horus's face, leaving a dark wound that bled fire. For a heartbeat, Sanguinius stood poised to deliver the killing blow. His blade flashed down and met a wall of force. Horus caught the strike with one hand. His eyes burned with molten light, and in that instant, everything changed. The air thickened with the weight of the warp. The runes upon Horus's armor blazed, his wounds sealed, his strength multiplied. Sanguinius felt the shift in reality itself, the horror of what his brother had truly become. The War Master no longer bled. He no longer felt fatigue or pain. The duel ceased to be a contest. It became a punishment. Horus moved like a storm-given form, faster than the eye, heavier than gravity. His blows shattered the air. One crushed Sanguinius's ribs. Another broke his arm. His mace tore through walls, leaving trails of molten steel. The angel struck back where he could, his sword singing through the haze, but every motion grew slower, every breath harder. The monstrous power of Horus was now absolute. Sanguinius, the most graceful and radiant of the Emperor's sons, was reduced to endurance. Every step an act of will, every strike an act of faith. The slaughter was methodical. Horus slammed him into the ground, hurled him against bulkheads, and tore through his wings. Each impact broke something new. Bone, armor, spirit. Sanguinius's body was a ruin, but still, he rose. He had known this moment all his life. He did not fight to win. He fought because he must, because destiny demanded that he stand, that his death means something. Horus roared, "Why won't you die?" and threw him across the chamber like a doll. The angel hit the wall and slid down, his armor cracked open, his blood burning the floor beneath him. Still, he lifted his head. Still, he looked upon his brother. The War Master approached, talons crackling with dark energy. He seized Sanguinius by the throat, raising him aloft like a child's toy. For a brief moment, the angel met Horus's gaze, not in hatred, but in sorrow. Then he struck once more, his claws raking across Horus's face, gouging deep into the demon's eyes. The War Master screamed, not in pain but in fury. Whatever fragments of restraint remained within him shattered. He pummeled his brother in a frenzy of inhuman strength, each blow collapsing bone and muscle. The chamber shook with the noise. Blood and light exploded across the floor. When the rage subsided, Horus stood over the broken remains of the 9th Primarch, little more than a heap of torn wings, shattered bone, and golden ruin. He lifted the body once more, studied the lifeless face of the angel, then, with an almost ceremonial cruelty, broke his neck. Sanguinius was dead. For millennia, the myth persisted that the angel had struck a wounding blow upon Horus, that even in death, he had marked the War Master, weakening him so that the Emperor might strike the final, fatal blow. It is a comforting legend, one that redeems the tragedy with a whisper of purpose. But the truth, as chronicled in the later accounts of the Siege of Terra, is far starker. Horus emerged untouched, unscathed, his victory absolute. Sanguinius achieved no triumph that could be measured in wounds or battle honors. His death was brutal, futile, and utterly human. Yet perhaps that, in itself, was its meaning. For though his blade may not have cut flesh, his sacrifice carved something far deeper. It stripped away the last illusions of mercy from the Emperor's heart. When the master of mankind beheld what Horus had done to his brightest son, something within him broke, and from that fracture came the fury that would end the War Master and unmake a god. In that sense, Sanguinius did wound Horus, not in body but in destiny. His death was not an end, but the ignition of vengeance divine. The image of Sanguinius lying dead at the feet of his brother would become one of the most immortalized scenes in Imperial history. Across the vastness of the Imperium, frescoes, tapestries, and cathedral murals immortalized that final, tragic pose. The Angel of Baal, sprawled upon the blood-slicked floor, his wings spread wide like a broken sunrise, even in death radiant and defiant. To the Imperium at large, it was the symbol of noble sacrifice. But for the Blood Angels, it was far more than myth or metaphor. It was a psychic cataclysm. When the Primarch's life was extinguished, his death sent a shockwave through the warp so intense that it shattered the minds of every son who bore his gene seed. A psychic storm of grief and fury exploded outward like a sun-going nova, consuming the 9th Legion in its incandescent wrath. Across the palace and battlefields of Terra, Blood Angels dropped where they stood, their bodies convulsing, their armor shaking as if struck by invisible lightning. Weapons fired from spasming hands, bolters chattering wildly. The air filled with their screams, not of pain, but of incomprehensible anguish. Visions tore through their consciousness. Flashes of Sanguinius being lifted into the air by Horus's talon, torn apart before their eyes. The feeling of their father's agony. The taste of his blood. In that instant, they were no longer soldiers. They were witnesses to his murder, forced to relive it through the shared psychic bond of their blood. The collective trauma shattered what sanity remained. The Ninth Legion fell into the grip of something that would later be called the Black Rage. The transformation was apocalyptic. Their fury dwarfed even the savagery of the World Eaters. Berserk does not describe it. This was annihilation given human form. The Blood Angels rose again, howling, trembling, their minds drowned in memory and pain. Their rage swelled like a tidal wave, breaking across the battlefield with unstoppable force. They no longer distinguished friend from foe. Traitor and loyalist alike fell before their fists, their blades, their teeth. They tore into the enemy with a brutality so absolute that even the demons recoiled. Personal duels that once required skill or discipline ended in seconds as the Blood Angels tore apart anything that stood before them. They screamed wordlessly, their voices animalistic, the cries of beings unmoored from reason. They ripped limbs from sockets, crushed skulls to pulp, gouged eyes, and shattered bone. Some saw only blackness, others red, a haze of endless blood and light. Some heard silence, others heard only the echo of Sanguinius's death scream, replaying endlessly in their skulls. They were gone, lost to fury, transformed into divine engines of carnage. Even the World Eaters faltered, stunned by what they saw. The loyalists around them could do nothing but stare in disbelief as the Ninth Legion devoured the battlefield in madness. This was no controlled fury. This was the psychic echo of a god's death, replayed through 10,000 minds at once. The Blood Angels became avatars of vengeance and despair, each one trapped in a nightmare where they relived their father's final moments again and again. They fought not in the present, but in the past. The siege of Terra lived on in them forever. Even now, 10 millennia later, that curse remains. In the 41st millennium, the Black Rage continues to claim Sons of Baal and their successor chapters. Those who succumb are lost to reason, their minds hurled backward through time into that terrible moment aboard the Vengeful Spirit. In their delirium, they believe themselves to be Sanguinius himself, seeing through his eyes, feeling the War Master's blows, reliving his death over and over. These warriors are gathered into the Death Company, painted black, their armor marked with red crosses of mourning. They are unleashed in battle not as men, but as revenants, echoes of their Primarch's agony, weapons forged of sorrow and wrath. Every swing of their blades, every roar of fury is a cry from the past, the psychic residue of Sanguinius's murder echoing across eternity. For those who fight beside them, it is both awe-inspiring and horrifying. To see the Death Company descend upon their enemies is to witness the ancient tragedy of the Ninth Legion reborn, angels driven mad by grief, haunted forever by their father's death. And what of the Emperor, the architect of so much destiny? For all his cold calculation and ruthless design, it is difficult to see Sanguinius's death as anything but a breaking point. Whatever the Emperor's grand designs had been, however questionable his methods, the sight of his most noble son, slain and defiled, was the moment that shattered the last barriers of restraint. It was not strategy or prophecy that drove him to destroy Horus utterly. It was grief and fury. Without Sanguinius's death, the Emperor's vengeance might never have reached its divine, annihilating climax. Thus, the martyrdom of the angel became more than legend. It became the pivot upon which the fate of the galaxy turned. The Blood Angels would forever carry his death within them, written into their very genes, a psychic scar that no science, not even the genius of Belisarius Cawl, could ever erase. Because Sanguinius's essence was not simply flesh or DNA. His spirit, his soul, was bound to the warp itself, to the same psychic realm that birthed the gods and consumed them. The Red Angel still endures, not merely in memory or in the echoes of his son's fury, but somewhere within that endless storm, wings unfurled, forever standing between mankind and the abyss. It is said that when Sanguinius fell, his death did not merely echo through the hearts of his sons. It imprinted itself upon the fabric of the warp itself. The psychic shockwave of his passing burned his essence into that dimension forever, ensuring that every descendant of his bloodline would inherit not only his grace and nobility, but also his torment. The Red Thirst and the Black Rage were not just genetic flaws. They were the psychic scars of a god's death. No matter how many millennia passed, no matter how many rituals of purification or genetic tinkering were attempted, none of his lineage could ever truly escape the thirst or the rage. It was the curse of being born from the soul of an angel who had died screaming against the darkness. And yet, Sanguinius was never defined by despair. Even amid the unending night of the 41st millennium, his name endures because he represented something utterly alien to the grimdark universe: goodness. In a galaxy built on conquest, deceit, and endless suffering, he embodied compassion and transformation. He refused to surrender to cynicism, even as the galaxy itself drowned in it. Unlike so many of his brothers, consumed by rage, madness, or ambition, Sanguinius fought to bring beauty into horror, order into chaos, hope into despair. He took command of a legion once reviled as monsters and remade them in his image, warriors of honor, discipline, and mercy. Through his example, the Blood Angels became not the Emperor's butchers, but his poets of war, artists of sacrifice who fought with both grace and fury. He was not blind to cruelty. Sanguinius understood that war demanded brutality, that the galaxy could not be remade without fire. But what set him apart was his conviction that humanity could still ascend through its suffering, that redemption was always possible, even for those thought lost. He sought transformation, not domination. He believed that even monsters could be remade into angels if they dared to strive for something greater. In that, he embodied what the Emperor only claimed to represent. Where the Emperor built empires, Sanguinius built souls. That is why his death mattered so deeply. The tragedy of Sanguinius was not only that he died, it was that he died believing. He believed that sacrifice could change destiny. He believed that even in the face of absolute evil, courage and love still had meaning. When he fell before Horus, his death became the mirror to the Imperium itself. Noble intentions destroyed by inevitable corruption, purity devoured by necessity. Like the sealing of the Eternity Gate, his death was both a literal loss and a symbolic closing, the end of the Age of Hope. When the angel died, humanity's light went out. One scholar of the imperial court once asked, why would the emperor create angels, if not because he knew he would one day have to fight devils? The question lingers still. The creation of Sanguinius, and his death, marked the cosmic balance between salvation and damnation. When the emperor slew Horus, it was not triumph, but tragedy. The death of the angel was the price of that victory, the moment humanity crossed from the dawn of the Great Crusade into the eternal twilight of the Imperium. The survivors of the Blood Angels crawled from the ruins of the heresy shattered beyond measure. At Signus, their flaw had been exposed. At Terra, their father had been slain. The restraint Sanguinius had held in life vanished in death. The red thirst deepened. The black rage spread like a psychic plague. Their chaplains and captains struggled to contain it, to give their madness structure, to turn their curse into something that could still serve. What had once been a shameful secret now became ritualized necessity. Thus were born the rites of the Death Company, broken sons clad in black, guided by chaplains who acted as both priests and executioners. They would die gloriously in battle, their madness given purpose, their deaths a mirror of their fathers. When Gilliman decreed the breaking of the legions, the sons of Baal resisted, not out of arrogance, but out of fear. They knew the flaw that ran through their blood. They dared not risk spreading it to others. Yet in time, successor chapters were created. The Flesh-Tearers, Angels Vermilion, Blood Drinkers, and many more, each one cursed by the same inherited torment. No matter how far they strayed from Baal, the red thirst followed. None were free. Every son of Sanguinius bore the mark of his fall. And yet, from that curse emerged something divine. Across 10,000 years, his death has echoed as both tragedy and inspiration. As the Imperium decayed into fanaticism and tyranny, Sanguinius became a beacon, the one figure of purity that even the most cynical could not deny. During the age of apostasy, when the ecclesiarchy rose to power and reshaped faith into weapon, it was Sanguinius who became their most potent symbol. His martyrdom became proof that the emperor's vision was worth any sacrifice. His name was invoked in every sermon, his death painted on every cathedral wall. The Sisters of Battle still whisper his name when they fall, in the name of the angel. To the faithful, he was the saint who proved that goodness could exist, even in a universe that despised it. But among the Astartes, the meaning was darker. To them, Sanguinius's death was not redemption. It was the wound that never healed. Every blood angel who succumbs to the black rage relives that moment, walking again through the corridors of the Vengeful Spirit, dying with his Primarch. For them, the heresy never ended. The siege of Terra is forever. And yet, perhaps that is the true legacy of Sanguinius. His sacrifice did what even the emperors could not. It united faith and despair, nobility and rage, light and darkness, into something enduring. His death reshaped not just his legion, but the very soul of the Imperium. For 10,000 years, his image has given courage to the hopeless, fury to the dying, and meaning to a civilization built on contradiction. The Imperium endures because he does not. And in that paradox lies the truth of the great angel. He foresaw his end, walked into it unflinching, and through death became eternal. His wings may have been broken, but his shadow still spans the stars.